Dove Audio presents Dream On by Cyrinda Foxe and Danny Field. Prologue, Diving for Diamonds. I'll begin this story with a memory of a moment in the winter of 1979, when Steven Tyler and I were alone together on a Caribbean island. He was rich and famous as the lead singer of the awesomely successful American band Aerosmith, and I was beautiful and pampered, his wife, his partner, his princess, master and slave. Millions of fans were in love with him and spent tens of millions of dollars to own his band's records and be at Aerosmith concerts. Kids wanted to be him, to be near him, to be like him. How I wondered even then, could anyone want to be like him? He was a monster, and I think he still is. No matter how much I still love him, no matter how he boasts about his recovery from decades of degrading drug addiction. Steven Tyler, née Tallarico, was my husband for nearly 10 years, and the father of my daughter, Mia, who means far more to me than does anyone else in this world. But her father is a creep. Mia adores him, and she knows that too. So back to that moment that sums up so much about what we had together. It was one of our periodic escapes from the grueling routine of the road, because when you're touring, you can only work so long before your physical stamina starts to give out. On the road, you work almost every single day. There are 2 days on, that's 2 consecutive days performing, sometimes 3, and then there's a travel day. Either that night of the travel day or the next night, Steven would be on stage again. Aerosmith worked harder than any band I've ever known in my life. 340 days of the year they worked. It was abusive to Steven's voice, and he would have to take a break every once in a while. This particular break happened at a time of crisis in the band. Steven's longtime partner, friend, rival, and bitter enemy, Joe Perry, the lead guitarist, had quit the band in mid-1979. Rhythm guitarist Brad Whitford left a few months later. Drugs, and more drugs had sent the group into a scary decline. The album Draw the Line had been released a year earlier, and though it got to number 11 on the Billboard charts, it was regarded as a disappointment, musically and commercially. There was still plenty of money, but the future did not look good. Steven and his managers, not a convivial crowd by that time, had to replace Joe and Brad. It was winter, and Steven was fried and badly in need of a vacation. Vacations were always to the islands, someplace hot where he could dig in the sand, parasail, scuba dive, snorkel, play with the fishies under the water, and just lie in the sun. Steven was like a child at the beach when school is over. These holidays were usually scheduled to last 5 days, but it took that long for Steven just to unwind. So I would fight for 10 days, and we'd end up with permission to spend about a week in the paradise of our choice. This time it was St. Martin's. We flew first class, were picked up by a limousine, and taken to our very luxurious hotel. Our baby, Mia, born just a year before, after we'd been married 4 months, was in New England in the care of a local family. Unlike the touring situation, there were no bodyguards, because there were no kids to bother Steven in St. Martin's. No kids could afford to be there. Of course, there was no one else from the Aerosmith organization. One purpose of the vacation was to get as far away from everyone else as possible. It was unheard of for any members of the band to spend holidays with each other, even in better times than these. The night before the day in question, the same day we arrived at St. Martin's, we'd had a horrible fight. Steven couldn't find his cocaine. It was stuffed in some shoe or some pocket, he couldn't remember which, and he took it out on me. Things were thrown around the hotel suite, including me. It was the penthouse of the best hotel on the island, balconies overlooking the sea and the gardens, linen draperies that blew in the Caribbean breezes, marble bathrooms, and me cowering in a corner while he raged. He found the blow, apologized, and promised me the next morning we would go shopping on the Dutch side of the island, where the stores were better than on the French side. Our shopping excursion the next morning was concentrated on skincare products, because our lily-livered white skins were about to be exposed to the terrors of the tropical sun, and we always overdid it. We had picked up nearly $1,000 worth of oils and unguents, which had been stashed in the trunk of our waiting limousine, when we stopped to look at the window of a very good little jewelry store. Prominently displayed was a gorgeous diamond and emerald bracelet. I gasped at the beauty of it and squeezed Stephen's arm. He gave me a loving little smile and said, "Let's go. I need some sun." We were in the sun for 3 hours, and of course we overdid it. We lunched in the sun and drank in the sun and even did drugs in the sun, ducking under beach towels for periodic snorts. Sometimes coke, sometimes heroin. By late afternoon, we looked like 2 baked lobsters, and we were starting to feel it. Back to our separate bathrooms, where we showered and smeared on a good proportion of the bombs we'd bought that morning. It would have been a great time for sex, but we were too burned to touch each other's ruby red skin. There was an alternative to intercourse, however. When I came out of my bathroom, Stephen was lying on the bed with the sheet drawn up to his neck. "Kisses," he said. That was our love code for a blowjob. It was my pleasure to give him pleasure, especially since we'd be avoiding the scorched parts of our bodies. I walked over to him and pulled the sheet slowly downwards. Circling his cock and balls was the bracelet from the store window. 90+ carats of crystalline fire. "Dive for it," he said. "No hands." I squealed a totally feminine, breathy little "ooh" and got down on my knees to retrieve the rocky treasure that was waiting to be taken. Stephen loved getting and giving head. His cock was already hard when I unveiled it, in all its gem-studded loveliness. 7 inches long, circumcised, not too large a head, and small, smooth balls. A mouthful of hairy balls would have been a problem when you've got only your tongue and teeth and lips with which to perform this delightful operation. I started by ignoring the bracelet. Just some tongue flicks, some suction, and some up and down lip action. Stephen was a silent oral sex recipient. No "suck that cock, baby," or embarrassing moans and groans. But you knew he loved it. His whole body told you that. Much of the excitement was going to be me going for the bracelet, so I put that part off until my love for Stephen's penis had been properly demonstrated, and then with my tongue began to poke around at the base, mainly to see if the thing had been clasped shut, which would have presented some problems, or if it were just picturesquely draped and easily removable. Fortunately, only the tiny platinum safety chain was attached, so the bracelet was loose enough to slide off. Carefully, oh, so carefully. I didn't want to scratch the swollen cock of America's foremost lead singer with anything so hard as a diamond. Once the bracelet was removed and between my teeth, I put it on the sheet between Stephen's thighs, went back to his cock, and brought him off. "I thought you'd like that," he said after he came. I didn't know if that was the blowjob or the trinket, but I liked them both. I did indeed. Within 24 hours, I would have 2 black eyes from this man, and wearing large sunglasses day and night, and a white Hermes kerchief to cover up the swelling elsewhere on my face. Wow, to be the #1 woman of the #1 man in American rock and roll. A man violent, cruel, and abusive one minute, generous, romantic, playful, sentimental the next. So cruel that those who were closest to him couldn't believe it when he got lower than they ever could recall. So romantic that he went way beyond any fantasy I'd ever had about the mythical guy of my dreams. Watch out for those myths, boys and girls. 9 years before that week in paradise, I'd thrown a cheap bag of clothing from the second-story window of my stifling, horrible home in Oklahoma, and grabbed a ride to Austin with a couple of wild, out-of-town boys. My life as one of the 1970s most glamorous and envied free spirits was about to begin. Last child. My real name is Kathleen Victoria, and I'm not going to give my last name because I want to leave my father out of this. I was born in the mid-1950s in Santa Monica, California. My mother was 26, and I was her 3rd and last child. She'd had her first, my brother William Edward, when she was 15, and her second, my sister Linda, a year later. I was a child of my mother's second marriage. When I was 6, Mom married for the 4th time. He was in the Air Force, and we moved from Santa Monica to Spokane, Washington. This man was a creep, and he was in my life until I left home at 17. Families have different kinds of rituals that give them a definition. This one, beat the daughter. It would come out of nowhere. You could be talking about something, and you wouldn't know what you said wrong, but suddenly there would be this hit in the head. I was deathly afraid of my mother my whole life. So strict, so proper, so disturbed. It still scares me to think of those times. She just hit me on the street in front of all these strangers. Wham! Unbelievable. Imagine how embarrassing that is for a little girl. My mother and my stepfather, they both disgusted me. I didn't want either one of them ever to come near me. My mother had no friends, and no one in her family spoke to her. She cooked every day, and church was a big deal for her. Her life revolved around the church. I don't know what she got out of it. She'd left the Catholic Church, which I'd been born into, so I wasn't allowed to be Catholic. Then she tried Lutheran and Southern Baptist and a bunch of others, as if she were searching for something, but always in this very rigid way that I always thought, and I think now, is the exact opposite of being spiritual. Now she's a born-again Christian, and she really believes Jesus is going to come back and is going to get you for being bad. I have news for you, Mom. He's dead. He's not going to come back and get anybody. This religion switching, it was like her marrying 4 times. Searching for something. I know she still hasn't found it. We talk every now and then, and I know that for sure. She's long since left my stepfather. Got rid of that fucker a few years ago. This guy had been in the Air Force, so we moved around a lot between the time that my mother married him when I was 6 and when I escaped at 17. I was always leaving what few friends I had made. I have to be fair to my mother. There were some good things about her, though the bottom line is a definite negative quality. For one thing, though, she was a military wife and could trace her family back to before the Revolution. There wasn't a hint of snobbery about her. To this day, she's one of the most democratic people I've ever known. She never, ever judged people by their race or social status. Most of the people I've met as an adult are much more judgmental about others on account of skin color and profession and education than she ever was. I've got to give her credit for that. I don't know where it came from, considering what a horror she is on every other level. It's almost an accident that she is so without prejudice. And she loved music and clothes, and those were the 2 things that saved my life. Made my life, really. And then there were boys. Oh, the boys back then. They were either mod or preppy. The preppy ones had madras shorts and Basswegian loafers. There was a teen club, and we could dance there. We twisted. No one touched anyone, which was fine with me. I didn't want anyone to touch me, except my boyfriend, who after all looked like Keith Richards. That's when I first started making out. I loved making out because I knew my mother would hate it if she knew I was doing it. But let's be real, it also felt great. Making out was fascinating. Finally, there was something physically and emotionally and sexually fascinating in my life. The guys were shy, and you just sort of kissed in the schoolyard. It was far from heavy stuff, but I just loved it. My mother would have killed me in front of everyone. She'd have grabbed me by the hair and humiliated me and dragged me in the house and beat me. Some of the girls would go further. They would get fingered. I thought that was the most scary thing in the world that could happen. These were the girls who wore eye makeup, too, and tighter pants. They had bigger hair. I wouldn't call them sluts, but just short of that. The boys talked about masturbating all the time. That was one of their big topics. And the girls would listen to this, and their eyes would bug out. We didn't know what the hell that was all about. Boys were starting to play with themselves a lot at that age, and so the word masturbate was a big word that would scare girls. I couldn't visualize it at all. I didn't know what a penis looked like. Even all my dogs had been female. Deep in the heart of Texas. I was stuck in Altus, Oklahoma, as far from fabulousness as you could possibly be. Still, you do what you gotta do, and I was determined to make the best of it. I decided to get in with the cool kids in the town. Now, they don't usually make friends with the kids at the Air Force Base because they're not going to be around too long, as I well knew. But somehow, I got myself a very passable Oklahoma accent. The right hairdo. A good hairdo was incredibly crucial to your social success in Altus. Joined the girls' club and went out with the cutest boys. My nickname was Skip because I looked like a Skipper doll, Barbie's little sister. But it was very flat and windy and got very cold, and I was seeing myself as this all-American on the outside whose perky exterior was covering up a deep, painful, and longing soul. I was reading the Koran and lots of poetry, and I could feel the rocks crying. How's that for adolescent enlightenment? But where was I? I wasn't even on a coast. I was so far away from everything, with my mother hating school, and it all sucked, with an exception or two. I think I lost my virginity in Oklahoma. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but it hurt, so I marked that moment as the loss of my maidenhood. It was a boy named Wesley that I think I did it with. He was gorgeous. He had a really good attitude and was really caring, with blue eyes and light brown hair. I couldn't talk about this first time with anyone because that changes you, and if you're not tough enough to stand there and get in with the game and be one of the tough girls who's having sex and talks about it, well, you don't, and I wasn't. They would have made fun of me, and I was starting to get the feeling that it was time to go. I wanted out of the life I was living. It was God's will. I didn't care how it was going to be done, but I do remember a critical moment. My stepfather hit me and started ranting about my mother making the biggest mistake of her life by just having me. This, by the way, was not a spontaneous revelation on his part, but had been learned from my mother herself. "You were a mistake," was one of her constant picker-uppers. Anyhow, that evening I'd been planning to meet these two guys and just hang out. It wasn't a sex thing with them, and it was hardly a social thing. They weren't part of my crowd, and I'd only known them for a few months. I was 17 then, but instead of just walking out the front door and meeting them on the street in front of my house, I went up to my room, put on my new shoes, stuffed $25 in my purse, packed a little bag, signaled to the two guys, and threw the bag out the window. Then I walked out and mumbled something to my parents about a girls' club meeting. I told the guys I was running away, and they said, "Cool, let's hitchhike to Texas," and I was out of there. There were a lot of lucky things that worked for me at that moment. For one, the two guys never even tried to touch me, so there was no problem there. I mean, I would have let them probably, if it meant the difference between getting away or not, but it's not something I had to deal with. And two, even though I lost a wallet in Texas and the police found it and notified my parents of my likely whereabouts, my mother made no effort to get me back. She was as happy to see me gone as I was happy to be gone. It's easy for me to say now that I would have responded if either of those guys had come on to me sexually, but I don't know. These guys were like my delivering angels. And before long I did learn that every now and then getting fucked was the price you paid for freedom, if you were a teenage girl living off the kindness of strangers. Well, me and my guardian angels made our first stop in Lubbock, Texas, where I met other kids who were on their own. You'd get put up at someone's house and you'd be moving all the time. So I went to Austin, and that was rough because now I was a street kid sneaking into places to sleep when there was no other choice. But like I said, I learned fast enough that you never had to sleep on the street if you knew how to make the right trade-off. And there was this cute college boy who found me crashing at the Y and told me that I could come and stay in his room. He was really nice, from New York, and he was small, so we had the same size feet, and he gave me a pair of boots. I wore boys' boots before it was fashionable. I did it with him a few times. I got a job right at the University of Texas, serving food from behind the counter at the cafeteria, and Austin for a while was a very cool place to be. I sat in on classes in history, philosophy, and art. I was in heaven. I wanted to be a student so badly, but obviously I wasn't going to be. I had a bunch of jobs. I panhandled, I babysat, I slept where I could. After a year in Austin, I started reestablishing contact with my mother, birthday cards and stuff, with the clear understanding that I was about to hit her up for some money to get even further away, to New York, for example. So actually I went home, but my mother and I both knew that it was temporary. She didn't really want me back at all. She was happy with her fourth husband without any kids around, especially without me. I'd been a vagabond in Austin and no longer a cute thing you'd be proud of on an Air Force base. So the plane ticket to New York was fast in coming, and a bargain for the whole family. My mother thought it would be better if I were gone, and gone I was. Max's Kansas City. It was the summer of 1971, and I was on a plane to New York City, the most naive, cotton candy-headed being there was in the world. No fear, no expectations of danger or being hurt. The only fear I'd had was at home. Any place but there I was going to be safe. The Barbizon had no room for me, so suggested the 36th Street Y, which is where I ended up, for $30 a week. A hotbed of lesbians. But I didn't care. Big deal. I was in New York. Some girls would follow me around from the minute I checked in. I'd been on my own for a year, and I was used to people chasing me around. Girls, boys, what's the difference? It's all the same trip. They all want something. Whatever. The Y was neat and clean, and I practically had my own bathroom. I only had to share it with one other girl. I tried to get a job and had to interview at these places where they gave me typing tests, which I failed, immediately and consistently. New York in 1971 was so radically different from what it is today that I'm going to have to ask you to really stretch your imagination. Try this. 25 years back from that date was 1946. Men wore real hats all day long. Women had those big, heavy hairdos. There was no TV or air conditioning. Music was the big band sound, and practically no one had been born yet, except I think Charlie Watts. My point is, things can change an awful lot in 25 years. 25 years ago, no one had cell phones or computers, and women never wrote books that began with them giving a guy head. Thinking about it now, I was so lucky. God or whatever was really watching over me, or maybe it's just a survival thing that's in you. You know, those guys I'd hitchhiked to Texas with could have been murderers, and I could have been undone in 1,000 ways. But something protects you, a little bit of bullshit and a little bit of creativity and instincts that kick in not always in the nick of time, as I'd find out with Steven Tyler, but in time to keep you from total disaster, from going over the edge. One thing I did first off when I got to New York was change my name from Kathleen Victoria to Cyrinda. When I was very young, I'd known a girl named Cyrinda, and I knew I'd always use that name. I had to have it. It was also very close to my big sister's name, Linda, and I changed my look as well. Gone were the proper southern shoes and layers, and into my life came platform heels. Very 1940s, rolled-up jeans with seam stockings and these little tiny velvet tops. And I started bleaching my hair, because I am not a natural blonde. I even bleached my pubic hair to match the hair on my head. When I started getting wilder and more stylish, I shaved my pubic hair into the shape of a heart. I must have been on speed when I did that, because it's not something you do casually in a hurry. It's a speed kind of thing, like the people who paper the walls in their homes with penny postage stamps, one at a time. The clubs in New York that I'd read about were the Cheetah, the Hippodrome, and Steve Paul's The Scene, and I figured that that's where I'd find young people, people my own age who were free. I had this fantasy about some dream place where everyone would be cool and fabulous, and I found that it actually existed. It was called Max's Kansas City. A lot had to do with the owner, Mickey Ruskin, who'd owned extremely hip clubs before on the Lower East Side and in the Village, and he had a crowd of artists and poets and photographers that would hang out at whatever club he opened. Then Andy Warhol had moved into his studio, The Factory, to that neighborhood around 1967, 1 year before he was shot by that nobody, Valerie Solanas. And all these people were there, and that meant lots of drag queens, plus tough, brilliant women like Bridget Polk and Viva, and fags. And then it became a hangout for rock stars who stayed at the Chelsea Hotel, like Janis Joplin, the Grateful Dead, and the Doors. You never needed any money at Max's. If Mickey knew you, you could sit there all night and help yourself to coffee. Or you could sign the check and never hear about it again. Some of Mickey's heavy drinking buddies, the crowd that we call the abstract expressionist heterosexual alcoholics, ran up tabs of $60,000 and $70,000, and this was a place where a steak dinner was less than $5. But those people sat at tables in the front, where the bar was. Upstairs was a disco where Wayne County, now Jane County, played records, and the different Max's elements came together. There was no disco music per se back then. People danced to rock and roll, and at the end of every night, Wayne ended the music with Give Me Shelter, a nice apocalyptic finish for a crowd that had danced enough for one night. My friends, the Warhols, the Queers, and the musicians hung out in the back room, a unique little universe. So there I was in the back room, checking people out to see what they were wearing, and the person I was most taken with was this tall woman in a black slip dress and high heels, and she was the most beautiful and glamorous woman I'd ever seen. It was Candy Darling, nay, James Slattery, a man, the most exquisite makeup and platinum hair and milky white skin, and perfect. So my first two human encounters, if you count staring at Candy Darling as an encounter, at Max's were with maximum icons of the gay universe. And so was my third. His name was Lee Childers, and he came over to me and said, "We're interested in you." And he soon became my best friend, and still is. To this day, he says he can't believe that Dorothy Dean was so nice to me my first time at Max's, and he was so impressed that he decided to find out who I was and what I was about. Naturally, the desire was mutual. I was absorbed and adopted on the spot by the cream of the New York gay underground, even though they treated me like a baby. "We're going to take a walk in the village now," and they'd fight with each other about whether or not I could come along. But it was all a game, and of course they let me come. They were acting out some code. You see, I was bait. And I was told, if any guys come up and talk to us, you just talk to them for a few minutes, and then we'll take over. These were fags and drag queens. A real girl was just what they needed to soften the prey up before they started weaving their web. Not that it was in any way sinister. I mean, they never kidnapped children and brought them to orgies or torture chambers, for the most part. And what a crowd it was. Lee, Candy, Andy Warhol, Jackie Curtis, Holly Woodlawn. Everyone around me was gay, vibrant, alive, creative, eccentric, intelligent. They were the ultimate males for me, and I could be their ultimate female. Even though I was shy and didn't talk much at the beginning, honey, look at me now. They could dress me up, parade me around, and use me to attract straight guys, and I thought it was all divine. They introduced me to this really beautiful boy. He looked like Jackson Browne, but very gay. Very effeminate. He wore these peasant blouses embroidered with sunflowers and was just gorgeous. And he and Lee and all the rest began my makeover. They gave me black lips because they said in the old movies, the black and white movies, they used black lipstick. Probably a lie. I had never smoked a cigarette, and so my teeth were like pearls. And I plucked out my eyebrows and drew in these high arches, and had raccoon eyes and white hair. It took them 2 whole days to strip it to pure platinum. Very, very glamorous clothing, electric-colored skin-tight 50s dresses, and it was great fun. It was that look that attracted the attention of Andy Warhol and his people. I mean, you show up at Gloria Vanderbilt's for dinner with Christy Brinkley on your arm, and everyone says, "Oh, what a pretty girl." But you show up with Cyrinda, and they go, "Oh, my God, what is that?" And of course, that's what Andy wanted. He wanted to be surrounded both by beautiful girls and bizarre ones. Miss Piggy Stardust. Pork was written by Andy Warhol and Bridget Polk. Bridget, née Bridget Berlin, was and is one of this century's most amazing people. The daughter of the president of the Hearst Corporation, she grew up on Fifth Avenue, with the Duke and Duchess of Windsor and J. Edgar Hoover as her family's best friends. In any case, she and Andy had turned a bunch of phone call transcripts into a play called Pork, and it was being put on by a crowd of backroom underground theater people. It was Andy's first contact with the exploding world of New York underground theater, except for using all the drag queen stars in his movies, and the alliance was not exactly seamless. Nevertheless, I was being asked to be an off-Broadway star, and barely arrived from serving cafeteria food at the University in Austin, Texas. They weren't offering me a starring role, exactly, but I was determined that a star is what I was going to be. In all modesty, there really wasn't a pre-existing role for me in Pork, but I was so fabulous looking that the director, Tony Ingrassia, told Lee that he had to have me in the show, which they were putting together at that time. See, Andy had stepped back once he had handed the play over to Tony, and told him to use a bunch of new people in the cast. So they invented a part for me. It was supposed to be a non-speaking part as the lesbian sidekick of a genuine lunatic named Via Valentina. I don't remember what my name was. Also in the cast were Jerry Miller, Cherry Vanilla, and Harvey Fierstein, who was an unknown then. I don't care what they say about Andy. I thought he was really a tender guy. I will never ever say a bad thing about Andy. He was really charming, and I do think he liked women very much. He did only good things for me, though I can't pretend not to have heard others complain about not getting paid, etc. That's crap. He did good things for everyone around him. He opened doors for people who couldn't have gotten them opened on their own. He had a brilliant and courageous mind, and he was always experimenting. If you were lucky enough to be part of this magical man's trip, the doors did fly open. I've never known anyone like him in my life, or seen anyone like him either. After I got the part in the play, he brought me into a circle, and we could talk about just dopey things like being Catholic and what we liked about going to church, the Mass. Because, you know, he was very Catholic, and his mother lived with him until she died at a very old age, and she was super devout. I think that Andy was a very caring person, but he cultivated this very cool front, as if he cared about nothing at all. "Ooh, that's nice. Ooh, fabulous. Ooh." Andy had my portrait done, and I could go to beautiful restaurants and beautiful places with him, and he was so nice, and tried so hard to help me. But this whole thing about dating rich men and climbing in society was just what I did not want to hear. I did not want to conform. I wanted to be wild and free and stay up and dance with fags all night long, if I felt like it. And that would have ended immediately if I had to start going out with these really rich men in their $2,000 suits. That was a lot of money for a suit back then. I would have had to start changing my clothes. Those kinky little dresses would be gone, and I'd have been wearing sensible little frocks and having children at 20. You know, come on, I didn't want to be some rich guy's toy, and I knew that the Warhol crowd was trying to get me into that. While Andy was trying to fix me up with Euro guys, I was loving my downtown queers more than ever. All those fags were much more to my liking than real men. I knew they had sex with each other, but that wasn't a big deal to me. They made me look like the ultimate sex symbol of our world, New York underground pop culture. I was the Marilyn of our scene. It was all dressing up and playing dress up. But I didn't even date anyone. Lee Childers to this day says to me, "You look like the biggest fuck-me babe in town, but you hardly fucked anybody." I was living on 9th Street between 1st and A in Penny Arcade's apartment. I hadn't known Penny, but she was a famous underground star, and she'd gone to Amsterdam, and a mutual friend got me to move in and house sit, which I did, and pay the rent, which I'm afraid I didn't. $450 a month was out of the question, especially with my fashion budget. I'm afraid I was not a responsible person. I think Penny hates me to this day because she heard in Amsterdam that she was getting evicted, flew back to New York, let herself in, and found me lying on the floor naked with my wrists cut. One of my dozen or so drama queen suicide attempts. Everyone did a few of those. And some, like Andrea Whips, went the whole way. Penny doesn't take any bullshit, and she was not pleased to walk in and find this naked person who hadn't bothered to pay the rent, lying naked on the floor. She didn't know if I was dead or alive, so she walked over and sort of nudged me. Not all that gently, with her foot. I came out of my unsuccessful suicidal stupor at that point, sat up, and asked this complete stranger what time it was. When she told me, I said, "Oh my God, I have to be at Max's," ran to the bathroom, bandaged my wrists, and was out the door. Penny wrote a song about the experience and threw me out of her house the next day. My eyes were opening. I was where I wanted to be. Nobody was telling me what to do. I was high on life. Off-Broadway was in its heyday. Then you'd go to Max's and dance till 4 a.m., showing off for photographers and artists. Jane Fonda would show up with Roger Vadim. I met Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin. Downtown was really alive, especially around MacDougal Street, where there were lots of musical clubs and bars. What's more, I was going to museums and gallery openings and parties and penthouses and movie screenings and all this kind of uptown stuff, which was beginning to feel a little unnatural. This was with Sam Green and the Warhol people, because they were social climbing at twice the speed of light. All that was very wonderful, especially getting to go to museums and look at paintings I'd only seen pictures of, but my heart was downtown, at Max's, on Avenue A, and also I wanted to rock. Where was the rock and roll, such an important part of my early life? It was happening in New York, soon to be revealed to me in the form of the New York Dolls, the hottest group in town, whose lead singer I married in 1977, and it was also coming from England. David Bowie, soon to be my first big-time rock and roll lover. At the end of 1971, Pork went to London without me. Bear in mind that Pork was a play supposedly by Andy Warhol and about Andy Warhol, though Andy had kind of distanced himself from it by then, and so it was a sensation in the hippest circles of the London underground. And of course no one was watching the trends in American art, music, and fashion more closely than David Bowie, just beginning to make a name for himself in the UK as a sensational, androgynous newcomer. He wore a dress and was very pretty, and everyone thought he was gay, which he encouraged, because it was a good gimmick. David had a great knack for spotting the most revolutionary talents around. Some people say that's always been his greatest talent, but I happen to think he's a super musician as well, and he's been very, shall we say, influenced by others. He's picked good people to learn from. He was an early fan of the Velvet Underground and noticed Iggy Pop long before practically anyone in America did, and of course, Warhol was a god. And here was this whole troupe of Warholians, so he and his managers thought, coming to London to do a play. Bowie and his people glommed onto the Pork people in a big way, in one of the biggest ways that's ever been seen in the music business, according to those who've seen it all. David's manager, the director of a company called Main Man, was a guy named Tony DeFries, fast-talking, faintly sleazy, definitely not one of us, but he seemed to have an immense and unlimited amount of money to spend, and he was eager to use this money to send word back to New York with the Pork crowd of the imminent arrival in America of the great English star, David Bowie. And so Lee and Wayne County, he's Jane County now, and Tony Zanetta and Cherry Vanilla all came back from London as employees of Main Man. They had so much money to spend that the late great Bob Fiden coined the term expensive account after watching them in action. After all this advance hype, David Bowie came to New York for his first debut American tour and started meeting people, all the people he'd wanted to meet, as if it were an agenda to be gone through. Naturally, Lee introduced me to him, and David and his wife Angie and I started hanging out together. They were the nicest couple, though she was more like a business partner and would certainly not object, and was in no position to do so, to David's picking up on another girl. By the way, David Bowie is as heterosexual a male as I've ever known. All men have some percentage of queerness in them, but David's was minute. He was pretending to be much, much gayer than he ever was. Whatever is happening at the moment is what he feels he should do, and gay was happening big time in the early 70s. He doesn't invent, he follows. He takes something that's original and makes it commercial, like gayness. But he loved women, and he started acting like he was Gaga for me. The second we met, we fell in love in a really sweet way. I was 19, and he was 24. I hadn't slept with more than 4 or 5 guys when I met him. I was more of a tomboy to protect myself. I knew by then how to get out before it got to that moment, and I wasn't interested in having sex because I'd been used a few times back in Texas, and I never liked the look on their face. I didn't like the feelings. I only liked doing it with someone who loved me, like a boy my own age. End of Side 1. Angie Boy was much wilder when it came to sex than her husband. I've seen her crawling around on her hands and knees after having sex with a bodyguard because it was such strong sex that she couldn't walk afterwards. David would be in one room with me, and we'd be making love, or we'd be talking and he'd be doing it with another girl, all on kind of a gentle level, and Angie would be in the other room making the floors shake. Angie's a great woman, very nurturing, and she really cares about you, and will defend her friends like an angry mama bear. Very intelligent, extremely eccentric, but her heart is very soft and caring. She had wanted David from afar long before he knew who she was, and went after him with fainting spells and all the wiles she's got, which is a lot, and she got him. How do I describe David Bowie as a person? Well, a very tender guy, but I think he lives his life on the stage, and when he invents these characters, it's an extension of something he wants to be. He's more real as a performer than he is in real life. I found him to be a regular guy, easy to get along with. In fact, I adored being with him. He was never difficult, There was nothing demanding. He was just there and happy to be with me. We always had a good time, and sex was secondary. Still, he was a great lover, and we talked a lot during sex. He wasn't devouring me, though now it might be nice to be able to say that he was. I was food for his psyche, but he's not like one of those stars that needs to be flattered all the time. I wouldn't have hung around with him if that's what he wanted from me. You can hire people to tell you how wonderful you are, and I was not for hire. Our first sexual experience was very easygoing. It was at the plaza, and there had been a party in his suite. He and Angie had separate bedrooms, and I remember that there was lots of food still around. No drugs. We never did drugs together. The bodyguards had been dismissed, and we were alone, and I knew that we were probably going to do it. Now, I wasn't there just for that. I was there because I was part of the Warhol crowd. Yes, all our clothes came off, and yes, it was quite passionate, though it was more comfortable than wild. It was a natural progression from the way we already felt about each other. It was inevitable, and I never thought of taking it further, of becoming his mistress or, God forbid, his wife. David and I just clicked, and we wanted to spend more time together, and that's when I was asked to go on the road with him. I agreed. After all, David's song Jean Jeannie was written for me. We were in the plaza, and he said, "I want to write you a song. What do you want?" And I'm like, gosh, no one's ever asked me that. I don't know. Something like the Yardbirds, I guess. So he wrote Jean Jeannie right there with that whole middle that's just like the Yardbirds. The guy is amazing, creating this song right before my eyes with his guitar and a little pig-nose amp. The song is not about me, by the way. Now he says it's about Iggy. But I don't think he was hanging around with Iggy yet. It doesn't matter. It's a great song. I was in the Jean Jeannie video, which makes me one of the first video babes, I guess. While I was on the road with David, he performed almost every night. He rehearsed all day. I talked on the phone and waited for him to come back. It was like a giant moving tea party, with new playmates for Cyrinda. I like playmates. I'm very childlike. Any old boyfriend will tell you that, too. Everything to me back then was a tea party. And with David and Angie, whoopee! Angie was doing it with one of the bodyguards, this black guy, Anthony Jones, just like David's real last name, which he changed because of Davy Jones of the Monkees, and he would come out of her room singing "Me and Mrs. Jones." He was fabulous looking, skin like velvet, hazel green eyes, this great English accent. Once we were walking through the Beverly Hills Hotel, going down towards the pool where the little shops were, and I noticed all these women staring at this guy, this big black guy with an afro, and it was because he'd pulled his giant cock out of his pants, and it was just swinging along, halfway down his thighs. You try and look collected walking through the halls of a hotel with an exposed companion. David and I had a cabana at the Beverly Hills Hotel, and we were sitting there while Angie and the bodyguard were fucking in the pool. I mean, we knew they were fucking, but if you were just one of the chic women with daiquiris sitting around the pool, it looked as if they were doing some kind of swimming exercise together. This black man and this squealing blonde woman. Paul Morrissey came walking over, and he picked up on it right away and said, "I can't understand how you people get away with these things." We were all rock and roll trash to him. It was interesting to experience the open marriage that David and Angie had, to see them able to sleep with anybody they wanted to. But I never wanted that kind of relationship for myself. I'm very loyal unless I don't want to be anymore, because when you sleep with other people, that's the end of the core relationship as I see it. You can be friends and sleeping around, but not lovers any longer. Did David ever have the hots for me? I doubt it. English people have a whole different way of looking at themselves and at women, and I think I was a desirable commodity, and had all the right friends, and so he had to have me. And he did. A short while after I got back to New York, I went to Roosevelt Hospital and found out I was pregnant with David's child. It was my first pregnancy and my first abortion. It was very nasty. It hurt, and I was really sick for a few days. Nobody knew about it, not even Lee. I wore a scarf and tried to go incognito. Abortions had recently become legal, and they would ask you lots of questions about, "Are you sure you want to do this? Why? Do your parents know?" I had to vary my age, unbelievably intrusive inquiries, but I suppose, like most women, I was so glad you could actually go to a hospital and get an abortion on demand that I wasn't terribly bothered by all the bureaucratic inquisition. They were asking another woman why she didn't want children, and she said that she already had children and couldn't afford another. But I just told them it was an accident, a mistake, and I didn't want this child. I was 20 years old. I didn't think for 1 minute that I wanted to become a mother, even of David Bowie's child. I still adore him. I saw him about 2 years ago in my friend's restaurant, and we were so excited to see each other. But I have to tell you, his accent has changed a lot, and I think he's changed a lot. Well, who hasn't? Come to think of it, David is quite the gentleman now, or thinks he is. Hello. Hello. It certainly is different. It must be his wife Iman turning him into a British aristocrat. The Bridal Doll. They're finally starting to write rock and roll histories now, like Please Kill Me, that give credit to the New York Dolls. They were a complete commercial failure, but one of the most important bands in the history of popular music. That's also true of two of my other favorite groups, the Stooges and the Velvet Underground. There were a bunch of factors that came together in the form of the New York Dolls. For one, they were a very hot, tight band with really talented members and great songs. For another, they were the center of a scene and played regularly at a place called the Mercer Art Center. It was near NYU on the west side of Broadway. One day it started to shake and tremble. It was quickly evacuated and fell to the ground. It was one of New York's great society landmarks in its heyday. Everyone who was anyone in the New York music and underground worlds went to see the Dolls whenever they played, so they were at the center of a major social and artistic world. The press loved them, especially Lisa Robinson, who was and still is an extremely powerful rock journalist, mover, and shaker. She wrote about them in her columns, especially in Rock Scene magazine. The Dolls were outrageous looking, and that was another big reason they were such a sensation. They wore spandex and glitter, high heels and makeup way before it was acceptable for an all-male band to do so. By appearing in practically full drag on their first album cover, they committed commercial suicide, getting labeled by the general young male rock audience a bunch of fags. They were completely not fags, believe me, but it's hard to explain that to your average American teenager. The lead singer of the Dolls was David Johansen, from Staten Island, tall, with long hair, a crooked smile, deep voice, heavy New York accent, and an incredible stage presence. You probably know him today as his alter ego, Buster Poindexter. He and the other Dolls used to hang out at Max's, and I started going out with him. I didn't love his band, but I didn't hate it either. I just didn't think anything of them. I didn't think they were that great, but they were interesting, and it was different. It was new music, and the lyrics were so great, each song was so impressive, and each one of the Dolls was amazing in his own way. What I liked about David was that he was young, unpolished, not slick. And it was real rock and roll, right there in the family of Max's. Practically, so of course I was interested in what they were doing. They were ours. This was our thing, our band. It was a scene. It was New York. I never thought they were gay. I never cared. I only cared about what someone was wearing, and they certainly looked creatively put together. I don't remember the moment David and I first met. It was probably either at Max's or at the Mercer. And I thought he was a snappy little talker. And Lee liked him, and before you knew it, we were tagged as the hot new couple on the scene. Rock Scene got a hold of us, and then our romance took on a life of its own. We were a famous couple before we even thought of ourselves as a twosome. Meanwhile, I was moving around all over the place, just different places to live. I moved in with Riddy, who was a manager at Max's. Then I moved in with Alan Stroh, who had something to do with the Allman Brothers and Jimi Hendrix. He was gay, and we adored each other. Alan had sublet Abby Hoffman's apartment on 13th Street, not far from Max's, a great apartment on the top floor. And Alan introduced me to this rich Iranian guy who would give me fur coats to wear on my dates with David. And soon David and I started living together. Then David Bowie entered the picture, and David Johansen was so angry. Starting the first time, Lee and I took Bowie to see the Dolls. I wasn't in love with anyone, so who cared? And I left David Johansen to go on the road with Bowie, but came back and started seeing David Johansen again. I was staying with Riddy on 8th Street, after leaving Bowie and hanging out with Iggy and the Stooges for a while in Los Angeles, and then David Johansen started knocking on Riddy's door. He was staying on 10th Street with a woman who made the Dolls' clothes, and it started up again. Why not? We got along well, and Lisa Robinson kept it going in her magazine, and we were the king and queen of the underground camp rock. Now I'm saving the Aerosmith stuff for its proper time and place, but by 1975, I had met the members of Aerosmith because they had the same managers as the New York Dolls, Steve Lieber and David Krebs. The two bands were rivals. The Dolls were incredibly hip and trendy and adored by the press, but commercially a failure. And Aerosmith was very unhip and loathed by the media. But by 1975, with the release of Toys in the Attic, they were starting to sell albums by the millions. I'd become friendly with Alyssa Perry, the wife of Aerosmith's guitarist Joe Perry, and she started convincing me that it was time I got married to David Johansen. Joe and Alyssa had been great fans of the Dolls, who were detested by the other members of Aerosmith, and the idea started to sink in. It started sounding good, as if it made sense. Everyone is getting married, she would tell me. All the girls our age are all getting married. You don't want people to think you're a groupie, do you? This was a horrible thought. No, I definitely did not want people to think I was a groupie, so I decided to marry David. Yes, I decided. David never proposed, like in books and movies. I said, I think we should get married now. And he said, Are you sure? I don't think that's really what you want to do. He knew I was going to do it in order to have something to do. But he went along. We were actually married at his family's church in Staten Island, which, if you don't know the New York area, is part of New Jersey that accidentally ended up being in New York City. David was my right arm at this point in my life. He was always there, but he was against us getting married. He truly believed in marriage. He was much more aware of what it really means than I was. And it's not a game. I think he did it just to make me happy, which of course it didn't. And it didn't make him happy either. I'm happy for him that he's happily married now to a terrific woman named Kate Simon, and they've been together for many years. The wedding of Cyrinda and David. Lee walked me down the aisle and kept saying, It's not too late. You can leave. And I wanted to, not because I didn't like David, but because I was in a church, and reality struck. Christ, I'm in the fucking church. This is actually happening. And I was hit with a big-time case of the guilt, because it was a Catholic ceremony, and I knew marriage was supposed to be a spiritual bond, and I'm walking down the aisle, lying with every step. I wanted to leave. And when Lee said that, I turned around and looked out the back door of the church, and there was a car sitting there, and I wanted to run so badly. And it would have been fabulous. Imagine that in rock scene. But for some odd reason, I went through with it, because I was too embarrassed to admit, always one of my big problems, that I was making a mistake. Traditional vows, serious stuff. If you're a Catholic, you don't mess with this, because if you believe, then there is no divorce. This is it. After the wedding, we went to his parents' house for a little reception. Then we drove into the city, had a couple of drinks at P.J. Clark's. It was really boring, and I was over the whole thing that very day. I knew it hadn't been the right thing to do. I wanted to run away immediately. I had made the biggest, stupidest mistake, but it wasn't one of the mistakes I would walk right out of. Now I felt like I was chained to someone. I just felt terrible. I hated it. I never changed. I don't like marriage. No, he didn't carry me over the threshold or anything like that. He was probably too drunk. My life as a newlywed was a nightmare. Some people tried to be supportive. Lisa Robinson sent me beautiful monogram pink towels with red initials, and I think the family gave us a coffee maker and other small appliances. That kind of stuff really turned me off, because it reminded me that lots of people took marriage very seriously, and I had been so frivolous about it. I knew in my heart that this was not supposed to be any kind of joke. I was ashamed of myself, and our relationship went whoosh, right down the toilet bowl. David started drinking more, and I didn't even want to see him. I didn't want to live in the same house with him. I wanted out. I was suffering from my own childish prank, getting married because it was a thing to do. David suggested we have children, and I said, absolutely not. We can't afford it. His answer was that plenty of children sleep in drawers, and I said, no child of mine will ever sleep in a drawer. That was ironic, since a few years later I was married to a millionaire with a baby daughter, and there was no money coming from him to pay for milk, diapers, and heating our house. We'll get to that horror soon enough. I can't really blame David too much. The dolls weren't happening anymore, so then all of a sudden, I began to see this person that was left. There was no diversions from actually getting to know a person. I wasn't ready to face getting that serious, so I do things like paint my bathroom over and over. I thought I had to create something to be considered alive. That's how stagnant our relationship was. So my bathroom ended up with 24 layers of gray and silver paint, and it looked like something out of a Fritz Lang movie. David's sisters would come around to visit the newlyweds, and I don't think they liked it either. Everyone knew that this little girl was too flighty to settle down, raise a family, go to Staten Island for Sunday dinners. One night I went out for a pack of cigarettes and never came back. But then I was seeing Steven Tyler, and his lawyers did all the legal stuff. My 1-year marriage to David Johansen had actually ended on our wedding day. The courtship begins. I know that Steven Tyler is the co-star of this book, and I suppose it's time to give him his proper entrance into my life. This would be in 1973, and I was staying at the apartment of my boss, art dealer Sam Green, on the Upper West Side. My boyfriend was David Johansen, and I was appearing regularly at his side in Rock Scene magazine, and friendly with a girl named Laura Kaufman, who was the secretary at the company called Lieber Krebs, which was booking the New York Dolls. It was a small office in the West 50s, the music business neighborhood, with Steve Lieber on one side, David Krebs on the other, and Laura in the middle. I had gone up to see her because the Dolls were on tour, and David wanted something sent to him in Texas. And into the office walked this whacked-out, crazy-looking guy, like a clown, a court jester, in the middle of Manhattan. He was wearing a long velvet patchwork coat, had long stringy black hair, black stripes painted on his fingernails, and a teardrop painted on his face. And his shoes were totally wrong. I'm thinking, what is this? What planet did this guy come from? Laura, I said, what is that? He had looked at me and gone right into Steve Lieber's office. And I knew he knew who I was, because if there ever was a wannabe who read Rock Scene, this was one of them. And Laura answered, "Ooh, Cyrinda, that's Steve Tyler. He's going to be a big star. We may be managing him." I had never heard of him, and I said to myself, a big rock star? I don't think so. Who in the world would ever talk to this person? He was too weird-looking. I'd never seen anything like it. Not in Manhattan. This isn't even Haight-Ashbury. It's in a world unto itself, and not a very cool one. He was born 4 years before me, on March 26, 1948, Stephen Victor Tallarico. Rico for short when he was growing up. A musician's son in the Bronx, New York. When he was very young, his family moved to a town called Yonkers, a working-class suburb north of the inner city and south of the Golden Ghettos like Scarsdale and Rye. While I was a child being beaten into submission, Stephen was rebellious, acting out, showing off. He said he was a nerd in high school, always being teased for his liver lips and all-round weirdness. Maybe, but he was a troublemaker and violent. His grandmother once showed me a little wooden desk that he'd had as a child and completely destroyed. It looked as if he'd ripped into it with a knife. I think his own drug habit was well underway by his mid-teens. He was shooting up when he was 16. The authorities came to his house looking for him, and he got busted for pot and expelled from his high school. This substance abuse problem was not something that came upon him after he was rich and famous. During summers, Stephen lived in New Hampshire, where his family had a cheesy summer bungalow colony, and he had some friends who were there the year round. Eventually, he graduated from a private school for troubled kids without ever learning how to spell. He spells as he hears things. You should see the rare letters he writes to our daughter Mia. They're so full of mistakes, it's pathetic. Of course, Stephen always had his music. You can't ever take that away from him, and I would be the last person on earth to deny that he is incredibly talented. It's in his genes or something. Besides the musical accomplishments of his father and grandfather, there was his grandmother, Constance, who gave piano lessons, and Uncle Ernie, Dad's aforementioned bandmate, who also had classical piano training. Stephen was a quick study when it came to music, and was one of the true things he always had, and he knew he was good. In my mind, I was always a rock star, he said to me. He formed a couple of bands in high school, first the Maniacs, later Yaks, just a bunch of kids doing other people's songs. But in Stephen's mind, he was on his way to meet with his destiny. His mother was making his band clothes for him. What a supportive family. The Tallarico property in Sunapee, New Hampshire was called Trow-Rico. The Trow part refers to nearby Trow Hill, described in some places a resort, which is way overstating the case. It's where older working-class polyester-dressed people go to get away from the grit of the city for 1 week every summer. It's a bunch of huts around a main house that sits on the side of the road, just off the highway. It's a bungalow colony, pure and simple. The Tallarico women made the beds and laundered the sheets. There was a tennis court that I never saw anyone use, and no pool, but a pond. But it was in New Hampshire during those bungalow summers that Stephen met the boys, Joe Perry and Tom Hamilton, who would become the core of Aerosmith, one of the most successful bands of all time. Joe had been working in a local ice cream parlor and had been a member of something called the Jam Band with Tom. They invited Stephen to join them as a trio. Around 1970, Stephen, Joe, and Tom joined up with a rhythm guitarist named Ray Tabano, whom Stephen had known in high school, but was soon replaced by Brad Whitford. Then Joey Kramer became the drummer, so Stephen would be the front man, and formed the band that Joey named Aerosmith. It was a word Joey had written on a school notebook, and it had nothing to do with the novel Aerosmith by Sinclair Lewis. About that time, Stephen shed Tallarico. He claimed it sounded too Puerto Rican, which I never understood. Rico, Rican, I don't know, and became Steven Tyler. Also, Stephen started getting laid a lot more at this time. He would swing from hippie mamas to real tarts. The group moved to Boston, played their first show at Nipmuc. No kidding. Regional high school, and then started doing the local club scene, etc., etc. They made their New York debut upstairs at Max's, which had gone from disco to live bands. But though they played at Max's, Aerosmith was in no way hip, glamorous, cutting edge, or fashionable enough to hang out there. Upstairs at Max's was a very different world from Max's downstairs, where my friends and I were. Then, as all the world knows, they got signed to Columbia Records by Clive Davis in 1972, who'd seen them gig at Max's, and the rest of the story, as a band, is widely available for all who care to seek it out. Steven Tyler's name meant less than nothing to me at that time in 1973 when I first saw him. Bear in mind that we didn't become a couple until the end of 1977. I mean, who in the world would even talk to this person? Too weird. You've never seen anything like it. His band had been playing the college and club circuit around Boston, and now they were in New York making plans for the promotion of their self-titled debut album, which had been released in January. That first time I saw him, when I laughed at him, there was the start of something going on with my feelings toward him, because the whole thing with Steven Tyler and me was that he was always the odd boy out, the scrappy little puppy that looks like it needs a bath, and I'd take it home to my mother's and find out it has ringworm or mange. He was like a dirty little puppy that needed care and cleaning, and girls never check for mange. We just see these little things we need to take care of. It's like taking a snake from the cold and putting it by the fire, and he bites you, and you say, "After I've saved you?" And he says, "That's my nature. I'm a snake." These are the things that came out much later, of course, but memories of first impressions always bring up so much more. Now that I've run out of good things to say, no, that's not true. I'll have a lot of good things to say about our time together, and lots more horrible ones, too. But getting past his charisma and his talent, let me add this. He's had a God complex all his life, and emotionally, I don't think he's got both oars in the water. A lot of artists don't. A lot of artists are eccentric, crazy people, and Stephen was, I still think is, a very troubled soul. I saw Steven Tyler for the next time at the Schaefer Music Festival in Central Park in the summer of 1975. I was backstage taking care of photographer Bob Gruen's baby, Chris, and Aerosmith came off stage. My impression of him backstage at Central Park? Again, a big giggle. He looked so silly. I couldn't figure this guy out. He didn't look cool. He didn't look like he belonged. He wasn't sophisticated at all. He did this music no one else was playing. It wasn't innovative, really, and ironically, that's the thing I liked best about him, and the band, because old-sounding rock and roll is what I liked. It made me feel comfortable. But to look at them, they looked like kids from the burbs, except for Stephen, who looked like this crazy, mangy, funky jester. Like he saw what the look was, but couldn't get it right. It wasn't hip at all. It was fruity. It was uncool. I think that's what caught my eye. Sexually, I had no interest whatsoever. I didn't think he was good-looking. He had no sexual appeal for me, which made it interesting when we finally got together. He was starting to get laid with some regularity around then, and naturally his idol as a rock star was Mick Jagger. But Mick Jagger never looked like that. I think no other rock star in history looked like that. Freddie Mercury came close, if anyone did. Stephen has a body like a frog, I should add, for those of you unlucky enough never to have seen it all. He has a wide rib cage and wide shoulders and a small head, and that's why he wore lots of those scarves and puffed out his hair, because his head is so small. It was Joe Perry I thought was truly sexy looking. I have photographs of him in his underwear, so it looked like he was very well endowed. I think his dick may be bigger than Stephen's, except for this one time when Stephen's dick got so big that I had to take a Polaroid of it. I think it was heroin that did it, but it only happened once, and guys, it's no reason to do heroin. Usually you can't even get it up. So Joe and Alyssa Perry and I became friends, and Joe and I had sort of a silent love affair without any physical contact whatsoever, and it was difficult for both of us. I should have taken him away from his wife. How different my life would have been. Alyssa and Joe Perry and I knew each other via the Lieber Krebs connection, and they were extremely friendly. One day I was hanging with Bob Gruen taking care of his son Chris while he was taking pictures of the band. I was feeling a little dizzy because it was really hot in there, so I left the studio. I think they thought I was going off to do drugs, which to them would have been really cool. I really did need fresh air. I was not doing drugs at all at that time, but still, my dramatic exit impressed them as something the druggie would do. Very soon we started hanging out, the three of us, going to dinner. I liked them. They were fun. They were new friends, and they got me to experiment with snorting coke and heroin. In the summer of 1976, I went to Boston and stayed with Joe and Alyssa. I was a rock and roll minor hotshot by then, but not a groupie. Never a groupie. Sometimes I felt guilty because I didn't fuck enough famous people, but I found that I didn't have to sleep with any of these guys to be there. Some girls felt that they had to sleep with the musicians to bring themselves into the scene. They were probably right. Rock and roll didn't equal sex for me. It equaled music. If someone made music I liked, that's what I was interested in. If they didn't make music I was interested in, I wasn't interested in them. Sort of a ballsy gal. I had my own thing. I had mixed feelings about Joe and Alyssa Perry. The drug thing scared me, and they were into it heavily. Drugs were still dirty to me, a sneaky bad thing to do. When I suddenly found myself an addict, which was not too far off, you can imagine what a low opinion I had of myself. But back then, it was just dabbling, so I thought. But Joe and Alyssa latched on to me, and it was very intriguing. I was sexually hung up on him. I was her best friend. We were doing all these drugs together, and the two of them were on this trip that they were better than anyone else in the world, especially anyone else in the band. No one in the Aerosmith circle could get close to Joe and Alyssa, but I was allowed into their secluded little universe. They'd become incredible prima donnas, and I'd never seen anything like this. I'd never seen such unmitigated ego-tripping. I didn't realize it at first that I entered the Forbidden City, but it seemed strange that the other people in the band and their girlfriends would only stare at me and not say hello. Alyssa was keeping people away from me, and I didn't realize it, or I didn't really care. So I hung out with the Perrys, and they'd come to New York, and I'd take her to stores that were hip. And, of course, she had a lot more money than I did, because the band was really taking off then. They were headlining Madison Square Garden for the first time, and I went to see the show and ended up backstage, and that was the first time I spoke to Stephen. He just looked at me like, oh, man. Tough guy look. Because by then he was getting lots of action. He was pulling groupies left and right. But I wasn't there to be pulled, and I suppose it was a challenge to his pulling power, which he was starting to think was gigantic. This was late 1976, and please bear in mind that it was at this time Alyssa persuaded me that I should marry David Johansen. I'm trying to tell this story with David Johansen's thread in one place and the Aerosmith thread in another place, but in my life there were a lot of overlapping. It was Alyssa Perry of the Aerosmith thread who was the most influential in getting me to marry David Johansen of the New York Dolls thread. Home tonight. After the backstage meeting at the Garden, Stephen dropped out of my life for several months, and Joe and Alyssa Perry and I went back to being the Three Musketeers. We were lonely without each other. Who am I kidding? I was pretending to myself and to everyone else that it was just a wholesome, jolly threesome, when it was really this powerful undercurrent of lust between me and Joe. But it was kept in the bottle, and the bottle was thrown into the sea. Joe and Alyssa would actually buy me plane tickets to join them on the road. They were very reclusive, very particular, and no one in Aerosmith's crowd was suitable company for them, so I was imported. When we were together, they didn't talk about anyone else in the band. It was as if the others were completely unworthy of being interesting to them. These trips all over the country suited me very well. I was bored and angry with my husband, David, and the Perry escape hatch was very attractive. And, of course, so was Joe. Being on the road with Aerosmith was becoming my primary life. New York was David, and that was going nowhere. Or it was CBGB's and Patti Smith and the Ramones, and I wasn't part of that. Andy was so uptown by then that his scene was stifling to me. And this scene looked like an interesting cupcake that you could sample and then decide to eat the whole thing. The style in which the group was traveling was not unappealing to me either, I'm quick to admit. At the Beverly Hills Hotel, Joe and Alyssa had a bungalow, which, if you don't know, is a separate area which has luxurious cottages. There are only about a dozen of them, and it is definitely super luxe to be staying in one. I had my own bedroom and bathroom and my own entrance, and Stephen came to visit me one night. He was being very bossy and a little rude. I got uppity and I said, "You have to go now. You have to leave. Get out." Because I had said something about my underwear disappearing. Things always disappear on the road. It happened to all my jewelry eventually, and Stephen made some leering remark about Joe probably taking my underpants and jerking off with them over his face. I didn't think anyone should talk to me that way. I got semi-violent. I knocked a chair over and chased him out. Stephen wasn't staying at the Beverly Hills Hotel. It was too sedate and plush for his taste, and he preferred the more modern and sterile L'Hermitage. After being ejected from my room, he found himself all alone on the grounds of the hotel, without a car and driver at his disposal. I have a feeling he figured out it was easier to return and apologize and try to get laid than to find a cab back to his own hotel. So he came back, the little scratching at the door once again, and we made up, and it was kind of sweet. My parents, Joe and Alyssa, were at the other end of the bungalow, and I was feeling frisky and rebellious. When I let him in, I was wearing full cotton underpanties and a T-shirt. Not seductive, a perfect little Catholic girl. We were talking small talk, and it started getting a little bit romantic, like, "I kind of like you, and I kind of like you too." And he suggested maybe we just lay down and cuddle, and we did, and I felt really safe with him. We were talking. He said, "Enough of this," and jumped on me. We had sex. It was very nice, very tender. It was great because there was so much leading up to it. He was considerate and giving, unlike the do everything to me while I stand or lie here like I'm the master, you're the slave mode he would get into later in our relationship. He was wearing just a bathing suit and a T-shirt, and we undressed each other and looked at each other's bodies without saying anything for a few minutes, and then I reached over and turned off the light, and we made love. I've never had great expectations about sex. The best it can do is bring you truly, spiritually close to someone in the course of physical proximity. And that night I fell in love with Steven Tyler. We came together and fell asleep in each other's arms. When we woke up late the next morning, Steven insisted that we go into the living room together and face Joe and Alyssa as lovers. He was crowing with pride. "I saw you with David, and I got you. I wanted you, and I got you." Well, it was nice to feel that wanted. Steven was really into it. I was his princess. He made me call my mother. It was too hideously awkward. But I babbled something about having met Mr. Wright. Then he called his mother and said, "I finally met the woman of my dreams, and she's just like you." I'd never met his mother, or I'd have ended our affair immediately upon hearing him make this immensely invidious comparison. Then he made me call David, who said, "Oh, yeah, okay." I know he had to have been hurt, but at the same time glad that I was out of his hair, and hoping I wouldn't change my mind. This was December of 1977 when we started going together, and Stephen was taking me home with him, to his house in Brookline, a converted carriage house, a garage. My heart sank, but I was in love, and everything would be okay. The 2 months we spent in the carriage house were a nightmare. I had no idea of the extent of Stephen's drug dependency, until the dealers started coming back. Word was out, Stephen was in Boston, and soon the house was crawling day and night with the creepiest, ugliest drug dealers and trashiest whores. I wasn't into cocaine yet, so I'd be tired when he'd be wired. There was no place to hide. Whenever I opened a closet or a cabinet, there was a stash of cocaine in some novel container, a peanut butter jar, a baby food container, a coffee cup. Oh, plus there were secanols and tuanols. I would be dumping everything I found down the toilet, but not fast enough to stop the flow of drugs into this house. Stephen would pass out on the floor, totally fucked up from all the cocaine and the pills, and the dealers would be going through his pockets for money while I was screaming, "Get out of here!" He'd wake up and accuse me of being involved in some suspicious activity when I was washing his underwear by hand in the sink because there was no washing machine. We went to Terry and Tom Hamilton's house, a stunning hilltop mansion, and then returned to this squalor. What could I do? Admit that people had been right? That I didn't belong with these people? This was really early into our relationship. There was no child, I wasn't pregnant yet, and I could have walked. But I couldn't admit that I'd made this terrible choice. I was so ashamed of myself, so embarrassed. Everyone had been right. End of side 2. Great Expectations. Stephen and I agreed as soon as we got together that we were going to have children as soon as possible. "I want you to have my baby," was one of the first and most endearing things he ever said to me. As our problems with his drug use and violence increased, I thought that starting a real family would set us on the road to normalcy. I knew I was pregnant, and a doctor said it was definite. I told Stephen what the doctor said, and he proposed marriage that same day. He proposed on one knee like a gentleman, and it was so sweet. He was wearing jeans and an emerald green silk shirt that I'd bought him, and I had on a flowered dress, a silky hippie peasant dress. He was laughing and gave me the reasons he wanted me to marry him. I was a special woman to him. I hadn't been with everyone in town. He was very happy that I was pregnant. This is what he really wanted, and would I please marry him? I said yes. It was so sweet. I was embarrassed. Then the two of us went and knocked on the door of all the band members and told them that we were engaged. They seemed genuinely happy for both of us. Well, they were genuinely happy for both of us. What with all the craziness, they all really loved Stephen and wanted what was good for him, and I guess I filled that bill in the minds of his bandmates. In all, the first months of the pregnancy were the best time Stephen and I ever had together, until I started getting very large, which wasn't until the end of the summer. We had lots of sex. I think that was the most faithful period on his part of our relationship. He loved performing oral sex. I called him the Cookie Monster because he called a woman's genital area her cookie, and he loved to eat cookies. He was ordinarily kind of passive, but he loved giving head. He loved getting head. But then he'd jump on board and finish his meal. You know, I hate him for making me do this. I never thought I'd have to bring all this up. My personal and private life. It's no secret that I'm writing this book because my alimony settlement is $252.08 twice a month from a guy who just sold his song publishing to Sony for something like $34 million. Excuse me for being a little resentful. There was no honeymoon, figuratively or literally. Within a week of resuming our normal lives, we were in Los Angeles, where Robert Stigwood was giving a party for the release of the Sgt. Pepper movie, and where I first became convinced that I'd made a terrible mistake. We were sitting at a round table. Britt Eklund was standing over by a window. Stephen looked at her and said to me, "God damn it, if you weren't here tonight, I could probably be with Britt Eklund." This was worse than a punch in the head. I was heartbroken. My husband had just announced to me that I, his pregnant wife, was getting in the way of his sex life. Britt Eklund? Rod Stewart had fucked her, and she was an important power chick to fuck. That would have made him feel like he was in. I guess that makes you a bigger star. It puts you on a level. It's climbing, pure and simple. Everything had a purpose. If you slept with the girl that Rod Stewart had had, it made you more like Rod Stewart, though God only knows why you'd want to be like that. I would love to think that Stephen finally slept with somebody interesting like Stevie Nicks. At least that would be to his credit, but I don't think anything so healthy ever happened. That's their whole thing, these stars. It's like they want to fuck each other, but they use some woman as a go-between, and it's always the same girl, or one of a select few, she's got to be faintly groovy and presentable. It's a hetero male thing. It's just another way they make fools of themselves. Rock and roll, Mom and Dad. Stephen's earliest attempts at being daddy were sort of adorable. Alas, in the last month of my pregnancy, he was there a lot, increasingly agitated, and big on me eating everything in sight. Feeding the two of us, all that stuff. Have some more strawberries, milkshakes, French fries. Earlier in the pregnancy, he'd been eating for the three of us, but now his attention was focused on mother and impending child. Oh, I thought he was going to be great. I really thought I'd done something really good for this man, and for myself. 1979 begins. I'm a new mom. I love my baby. I hate everyone else in the world. I don't care about anybody. And I have this new person to love. And everything was just so groovy for me. Mia's father, meanwhile, was so immature. He just wasn't a father. He's never been a father. He's not a father. He still isn't a father. He's this guy who had kids, physically. But a dad is a dad. He's not a dad. Of course I wouldn't know because I never had one either. But he's not a dad like my friends had. He's just there when it's convenient for him, and he's not when it's not. He did change a few diapers. He loved giving her a bath and taking her bath with her. So he would do these wonderful things and then let the babysitter go because he decided we didn't need one. We could take the baby with us wherever we went. Then he started eating her food. He loved her food. Strained veal? He couldn't get enough of it. Sometimes there was none left for Mia. He was jealous of the attention I was giving her, but I hear that's pretty common, so I won't lay into him too heavily on that count. On the other hand, he was using drugs around the baby all the time. One time he had done so much coke, he got paranoid and hid naked in the closet of Mia's room because this guy had come over and he didn't want to see him. Obviously, I didn't want him anywhere near her when he was that wigged. Another time, he babysat her once when she was starting to walk, and I woke up and I saw that her little tiny pinky was all blue. I said, "What's wrong with her?" He had passed out while he was supposed to be watching her. This little tiny kid racing around the house, and she broke her finger. We took her to the hospital. We got this look as if we had done something to her. I guess they see that kind of stuff up there in Appalachia. They had put her out and performed surgery. She had to wear a cast on her arm. I knew better than to try and blame Stephen for this, because he would have hit me if I'd said anything. Today I'm fiercely protective of her. Some delivery guy came to the house just recently, and he was kind of looking at her. And I wanted to punch him in the head. I said, "What are you looking at?" When we first got to New York, she was 11. She had boobs, and men would look at her on the street. And I'd go, "What do you think you're doing? This is a child." She's 17 now. I've got to ease up a bit. Now he's this real sophisticated pop. She went down to Florida to visit with him last year and didn't tell me her boyfriend was going to be there, but Stephen knew it and booked a room for the two of them in a hotel. He never called to ask me if it was okay if my daughter and her boyfriend stay in the same room. Let's face it, I can't stop them from doing what they're going to do, but I don't approve of it, and she is my child, and her father shouldn't be booking hotel rooms for her and her boyfriend. I'm old-fashioned that way. As I write this, the old bastard has come back into our daughter's life in a most intrusive and unwelcome way. Suddenly, he's interested in her education, and in particular, he's keen on finding her a boarding school, the kind where each girl has her own horse. I don't think Mia wants a horse, and I think that her friends tend not to be the horsey types either. She's a little more bohemian than that, a little more, shall we say, multicultural. But I'm sure I know what Stephen's agenda is here. I can just imagine his accountant saying to him, "Listen, if she doesn't live at home, you don't have to pay the rent on the mother's apartment. Get the kid into a boarding school outside of New York, and your ex-wife can find herself a nice little studio in Queens. You'll save thousands of dollars a year." This concept was undoubtedly one that Stephen couldn't ignore, because suddenly he's pulling her out of school, without my permission. And I am her legal custodian. There they are, driving around the countryside to such institutions as Miss Pritchard's School for Young Ladies, the two of them in the back of a limo, with him on a cell phone to his higher power, i.e., his lawyer, no doubt. I intend to ignore whatever riding academy Stephen comes up with. It's a little too late to burst upon the scene with the plans for educating a child he's paid precious little attention to for the first 17 and a half years of her life. My daughter will go to a fine school in New York and live at home with her mother, who has been her only real parent since the first weeks of her life. Of course I feel guilt about the mess I was during the early years of her life. Still, I rescued both of us from drug hell in New York in 1982, and I rescued both of us again from New Hampshire hell 8 years later. I was always a tigress of a mother, and Mia was never physically abused or hungry. Emotionally abused? By me? I hope not, but I was a drug addict until she was almost 4 years old. I have a lot to answer for. I admit that. Emotionally abused by her father? You bet. He has a lot more to answer for than I have. If Mia disagrees, she can go on every talk show in the world. She can give interviews in every magazine that's read by her generation and mine. What the hell? She can move out. Go live with her boyfriend, or whomever she chooses. Get married. I don't want her to. Don't get me wrong. We're very close now. We understand each other. We're pretty good roommates, and I've learned a lot about being a mother. I like to think she needs me, and I know I need her. Newlywed Blues. After Mia was born, the marriage had changed. It was like my real father. The same thing was happening to me that had happened to my mother. I had Mia when I was 26. My mother had me when she was 26. The marriage was over by the time I was 2, and the same with me and Steve. What was good was that we were really tight, so compatible in some ways, so complementary, like salt and pepper. He's so earthy, and there's an earthy element in me that I had to tap into. And I was extremely sophisticated compared to Stephen, and he brought something into my life, get down and smell the earth and eat the grass. It was the earthy thing that I thought I needed, but he was too primitive for me, and I was way too sophisticated for him. I don't mean clothing and style stuff, but more intellectual things. To this day, he says to me, "You're too intellectual." When it clicked very well. The Two Musketeers. When it was between Mia and the drugs, it was over. When there was no way he was going to stop, when his addiction got so pervasive, when the dark side took over, the relationship was over. During our marriage, when we should have been growing together, we were shrinking because of the drugs. I should have been becoming a woman, an adult, married with a child, and yet I was reverting further and further back into the safety net of being a child. It's only this past year that I accept the fact that I am an adult. I would be so immature for him that I didn't know how to deal with anything. I was not growing. Our marriage fell out of the night sky like a jet hit by a bomb, and the bomb was drugs. Drugs destroyed us. Stephen, me, the band, all at different times, but with a certainty that no one, looking back at it, can deny. Okay, drugs are a symptom, not the disease. I'll buy that. We were disturbed people to begin with, but the drugs brought out everything with a vividness that was horrifying, life-threatening, catastrophic. Stephen made attempts at recovery while we were married, but they were lame. He was in Hazleton, the famous rehab in Minnesota, in 1985, but drugs were being smuggled to him while he was a patient there. When he got out, he got right back onto drugs. Teresa, now his wife, was in the hotel room nearby waiting for him. Stephen went to see his then-manager, David Krebs. Stephen was standing in the rain begging David for money, and David rolled up the window of his car and drove off. And that was the end for them. All these early tries at rehab were futile, until it finally took. They would be for 72 hours, 5 days maximum, and let's face it, he needed a lot more treatment than that. Once he had to write me a letter. It was part of his therapy, and I had to write him a letter, which he was required to read out loud to his group. He actually called to say I was sweet to put in my letter how afraid I was for him, and how honest I was about the cocaine, and that I was afraid he would be angry at my honesty. Mr. Nice Guy, during our divorce, says he didn't remember marrying me. I stopped going to shows completely within a few years of our marriage. I was taking my life in my hands, because when he came off stage, he would go crazy. He'd throw anything he could pick up at anything that was in his way, especially women. "You cunts, you fucking whores." If I walked into the dressing room, I'd get thrown to the floor. If I went anywhere near him, or spoke one word to him, he was crazed, wiped out, and violent. It took me a long time to give up hope on him. I thought he was so talented, a suffering poet. That's what I romanticized. and I still believe it. I still have love-hate feelings toward him. I can't believe I was so wrong, and I can't believe he ever really stopped loving me. It's very heartbreaking at times, and yet, hey, it was something that happened. Sometimes I can break down and cry my eyes out over him, and sometimes I'm so consumed with loathing that I think I'm going to burst. It was too hard for me. It was too over my head. It was too much mental illness. I mean, he said publicly that when he was on drugs, he would fuck a crack in the sidewalk. And for 9 years of that time, that man was my husband. On the other hand, there were the incredibly, lavishly, fabulously wonderful things that happened. Lots of them had to do with the love Stephen and I had for each other, and lots had to do with the amounts of money at our disposal. You can get very spoiled as the wife of a rich rock star, and I mean rich. Aerosmith had its first million seller with the single Dream On in 1976. The first time out, in 1973, Dream On only went to number 59 on the Billboard charts. This time it climbed to number 3. Even the debut album came back onto the charts. The group was selling albums by the millions, headlining arenas, and the money was pouring in. I loved being married to a rock and roll star. I grew up listening to rock and roll, and this was a dream come true, in a childish way. I was 24 and Stephen was 28. I was still very young, and I still had that passion, let's kick up our heels and run through the fields and eat clover like young fillies. This was the height of our youth. I'd done a lot of things, and I was ready to go wild. And he was someone I truly felt affection for. I really adored him. He's like mold, he grows on you. He can be so charming and delightful and so needy in a good way. And then he could be so wonderful, like little Lord Fauntleroy. He was like a child. He would write the most beautiful love letters, the most beautiful poetry, right on the sheets. And he'd draw ivy branches around the poems. It was all about you and me forever. Very lyrical. We made love everywhere, airplanes, hallways, hotel kitchens. That was so much fun, just to do it to see if you could get away with it. I'm always asked if we had sex in an elevator, as in the Aerosmith song. Sure, but on the other hand, I wouldn't be so bold as to think that the song relates to me. I'm sure if he had sex with me in an elevator, he's probably done it with others too. Sometimes I would listen to those songs and think, whoa, that's interesting. I wonder who that one is about. He'd buy me the most beautiful jewelry and gold to match my hair. In St. Martin's he bought me a Jamaican doll with a little hat and a little apron, a little black girl with a fruit basket. And he said, look, she's pregnant. And I said, oh, how sweet. And he'd say, no, really, look. He had taped a jewel box under her apron with a ruby ring in it. When Stephen gave you a gift, it was always in a clever way, or in a sexy way, like the bracelet that was wrapped around his cock at the beginning of the story. There were 9 emeralds and 6 diamonds on that one. It was a perfect ending for a beautiful day, a great early evening event. We had a bond. This is what makes you want to stay in love, and it's what makes me in love with him to this day. While I hate him so much at the same time. I think the more you've broken down, the more it opens that door, and we loved each other so much. I was his little princess. No one could talk to me in a way that was not right, according to him. And when he introduced me, he'd say, this is my lady. To this day, though I'm legally at war with Stephen, and I have so many reasons to hate him, if I get too close to him, I just become totally vulnerable, and I'm overcome with compassion for him. All the anger and all the reality of what he's done to me go away, and his power over me returns. It's a power that no one's ever had and no one will ever have again. He's just got this delicious poison that surrounds him. I've been asked if I knew or thought about Stephen's possible gay streak. I mean, he said things to the press about being in love with Joe, though not sexually, he stressed. And then there are those clothes and that anything-goes life he was leading before he got sober. Well, I don't know for sure, but I had my suspicions. Sexually, he was kind of passive-aggressive, you know. Take me, ravage me, play with me all over. He liked to be taken. He wanted everything done for him and to him. He wanted just to stand there. But I never heard him say anything about finding another guy attractive, and I never saw him giving another guy the once-over that fags do. A look I know very well. Stephen got spotted buying a dildo at the sex store, but it was probably for one of his girlfriends, because when you're on a lot of cocaine, you can't get it hard, and girls do need to be satisfied somehow. Bust up on the road. Security is a big word in rock and roll touring, and of course it doesn't mean financial security or emotional security or airport security, but strong-arm stuff, protection from harm, protection from fans, fanatics, the press, anyone or anything you don't want to be bothered with. We had bodyguards galore. You hire a security company, and they provide you with a contingent of bodyguards. The more drugs a group uses, the more security they're likely to have. First of all, the bodyguards insulate you from nuisances like the police and hotel managers who might have a problem with funny smells, behavior, and visitors. And second, the more drugs you use, the more paranoid you get, and the more convinced you are that you always need more and more security because everyone is out to get you. The more sex a group has, the more bodyguards are wanted because they also procure. During a show, the girls that are really eager to get laid work themselves to the front of the crowd, and they take off their blouses. The guys in the band are up there singing and playing, and of course checking out the hooters being thrust at them. When they see someone that looks good, they make it over to the side of the stage and get the word out to the bodyguards. This all happens in a split second, and the bodyguards pass the word to the security people who are working the crowd, and the delicacy is extracted from the audience and brought backstage. Little do the girls know. Actually, they often know full well that they may have to fuck the bodyguards and the road crew before they get to any of the godlike band members. The status of the piece of meat carried backstage will be conveyed to the crew. I'd like a closer look. That one definitely. Or try her out and let me know, are some of the messages they get passed around between the band and their loyal employees. Each guy had a different type of girl they liked, as do all guys, come to think of it. Joe liked really dorky, bitchy ones. Sometimes I thought he was flaunting these really trashy groupies at me just to get me uptight. They were really bargain basement broads. You don't see high-class chicks coming around. These were flea bags. And when the wives weren't around, the guys were fucking like tomorrow would never come. I saw this because I went everywhere on the road, thinking I was supposed to be with Stephen at his side. The other wives were smarter and just went to the major cities. Usually after a show, the guys would get their women and leave me and Stephen alone. No one wanted to hang out with us. Tom was screwing around, that's certain. Joey Kramer, once he got married, sort of reformed. Before that, he was doing it in the parking lot next to his car. And I really can't speak about Brad Whitford. I just don't know what he was up to. His ex-wife Lori probably hates me. I didn't know her very well, but when I was pregnant, I had this girl Karen Lesser come on the road to help me out with morning sickness and stuff. And now she's Karen Whitford. A word about the wife-swapping tales that have made the rounds. That would have been exciting, and these guys were not exciting in that way. Their excitement comes from their weirdness, from the blackness of their souls, because they weren't really having a good time. They were not wife-swapping. Stephen probably would have liked to screw Terry Hamilton. I saw him put his hands on her breast a few times. I like Terry, and she and Tom are still together. We had big bossy bodyguards who walked around like giants, protecting us skinny little things from the big scary world out there. Many times I had to call on one of them to protect me from my skinny little husband, and in fact, the security staff often broke up fights within the band before they escalated into something horrible like a sprained finger, or anything that would jeopardize a concert from going on as scheduled. Really, their main job ends up being babysitters for a bunch of unruly, spoiled brats who are potentially dangerous to each other. The bodyguards became family members, like the road crew, and some I really got to like Mark, a big, huge, bearded giant of a guy, smart, with a wonderful girlfriend. He loved to be the bodyguard that took me shopping, because then he could buy things for her. I would always buy him a shirt or something and charge it to the band. I didn't think Stephen ever knew. I'd say, hey, that would look great on you. Let me get it for you. What else do you need? I was generous and much easier to take care of than Stephen, so I was a plum assignment. Stephen would be off looking for drugs and poontang, and some of the bodyguards were uncomfortable accompanying him on those missions. He was not a choice assignment. Some of them felt badly for me, knowing what he was doing, and they'd say to me, I'm not going to tell him what you do, and I'm not going to tell you what he does, which was a signal to me that he was screwing around, because I clearly was not. So I started to think that maybe I should go looking for cute boys and have some fun on the road, like the guys do. And why shouldn't I? Bottom line, I never fucked a fan, though there were certainly plenty of opportunities. Sometimes Terry Hamilton would come with me, and we'd go around the stands and check out the T-shirt vendors and the bootleggers. Just kind of snoop around and see what kind of merchandise was there that the band wasn't making any money on, and report back to the bosses. There's no way you're going to have a sexual encounter during a show, and it's certainly much more fun to stand around and talk to the fans. They don't know who you are, or God forbid they do, and you watch their faces, and they're so excited they can't breathe. That's sexy. It's better than actual sex. You're turning some kid onto something that's his dream, and you're this fabulous-looking woman. However, you could make out a little, maybe a little kiss and peck, only if they didn't know who I was. And I always had some cocaine in my pocket. How could you not? If I didn't, I was probably miserable. Anyway, they didn't know who I was, and if they did, who would they tell? Who would believe them? Is this boy going to call the newspaper? The only people that did were the girls that got on the roadies bus. Sometimes that would be a nightmare. Those roadies didn't give a shit. They got no glory, only some ass, and they banged it every which way. We were always hearing stories that some roadie stuck something unsuitable up a girl, and the police were called, and there would be charges. I wish I could only remember how great it was on the road, but the memories are all clouded by Stephen's psychotic behavior. There were so many times when everyone who could would get out of his way. It was hardest for me because I was his wife. Where was there for me to go? He's a real textbook piece of work. He could be so kind, but I think he's mentally ill, so that overrides everything. What good is all the glamour and the crowds and the music and the money and the status when someone is going to be punching you in the head at the end of the night or holding a knife to your throat? Clothes and boys. One thing that's always been inimitable, thank God, about Steven Tyler is his on-stage wardrobe. You go to a Kiss concert, there's kids in Kiss makeup, but I never saw one kid turn up at an Aerosmith show wearing Steven Tyler drag. Never in my life. No imitation little Stevie Tylers. Everyone wants to know where the look came from, all those blowing rags. I think it started with him wanting to dress up the microphone with fabric, and then this court jester look kind of spread to him. Maybe he came first, and then dressed up the mic. In any case, it was a very touchy subject. One time, the mic rags weren't there, and I had to make them on the spot. I was ripping up fabric, and he was furious that no one could find the boxes of rags. They were not just rags. This was his stash. Steve was crazy about those rags, especially the rags that were sewn into his pants. The clothes were made so terribly, a professional dressmaker would look at these and say, "Who made these?" Actually, he had a couple of people who made those costumes. He worked with the designers. He'd want them ripped and drawn on in a particular way, and they had to go with the stripe on the fingernail and the teardrop. He had these raggy outfits like clown costumes. Some were good, some were not. Nobody else in the band needed anybody to help with their onstage clothing because they wore street clothes. They just dressed cool. Stephen was the only one wearing weird costumes like the hoodoo doctor out of some East African tribe, the witch doctor. I went 2 years ago to an Aerosmith show. He is my daughter's father, after all, and made friends with his new wife. I never spoke to her before in my life. I think that's his soulmate or something. I think he's in love with her, and I think that's exactly the kind of woman he needed. Years ago, he told me she had been a hooker and was turning tricks to get him his drugs. "That's a real woman," he'd say, "and how could I ever leave her after all she's done for me?" And I asked him what he does for her. "Nothing, that's what." And then he got angry. But I think he's found someone perfect for him. He had reached higher than he could keep up with. Now he knows what he can handle and what kind of woman he needs. He needs someone to keep his shoes lined up in the closet. He's archaic. He's not this hip-rocking guy who hires a maid to do these things. He comes from a very primitive type of background, Italian-Polish, where women stay in the house and cook. I think Stephen has a problem trying to make it in the upper middle class, because he comes from a very working-class, tract house, polyester kind of upbringing. He tries to pretend he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Honey, it's called chrome. And he's very envious of people who do things properly. He'd visit someone who actually had servants, and the situation would freak him out. He didn't want that. He didn't want me to have a proper housekeeper or a nanny or a cook. He wouldn't let me have a decorator when we moved into our first house. He said I should do it myself, like his mother did, like his family, who live in a Spiegel catalog. Those slutty chicks, rock stars end up either with sluts or models. It's classier to pick models, there's no doubt. They can keep working. They travel a lot. Their boyfriends travel a lot. They're adored and pampered. Their guys are adored and pampered. It's two spoiled and pretty people on an equal level of success in their own fields. John Bon Jovi married his high school sweetheart. He's a little more grounded as a person. But these guys with their sluts, you're a skinny little guy from the boondocks. You're probably the neighborhood nerd. And then you pick up a guitar and kids start dancing around and suddenly you're the hip guy. These guys are nobody and then they're somebody. And they fuck everything that walks, moves, breathes. And these girls take off their panties, throw them up on the stage, show their tits, and the guys in the band signal the bodyguards which girls they want brought backstage afterwards. Now some girl who's going to be wiggling her tits at musicians, night after night, concert after concert, that's a slut. It's so easy to have them, and then throw them away. Or pass them around if they're the higher class, the courtesan class. Listen, I'm not a slut and I'm not a courtesan, but neither am I a saint. I'll confess right here and now that I once had an affair while I was married to Stephen, with a kid young enough to be an Aerosmith fan. One time, Stephen was out of town, and I decided, God damn, it's my turn to have some innocent fun. I was really lonely and sad, and there's this kid who's fun, no hang-ups, no demands, and I wanted to have some fun. So we had a few drinks, and one thing led to another. Subsequently, Stephen and I had returned from New Hampshire to our apartment on the Upper West Side in New York, because he had some business with his managers. We had left Mia in New Hampshire with the housekeeper and her daughter. And lo and behold, this housekeeper comes to New York and has a meeting with Stephen and tells him I'm sleeping with her son. He was so stoned, and she knew it, and she was trying to get money out of him. She and her husband were trying to get control of Stephen because he was so weak, and they wanted to end up running his life and taking over the house. It freaked Stephen out to hear that I was an adulteress. It was my first fling in 3 years of marriage, compared to probably 100 of side fucks for my husband. And he files for divorce. He won't talk to me, and I call the house to find out about my daughter. Get this, the housekeeper's daughter has taken my child and hidden her on a farm in Massachusetts, with Stephen's approval. The housekeeper is feeding my husband the story, feeding him coke, and agrees to have our daughter removed from our home. I'm ready to kill people now. I had to get lawyers. No one was on my side. Stephen's family refused to help me, of course. In fact, Mia was brought from this mysterious farm in Massachusetts over to their house, now in the custody of a court-appointed guardian. You'd think Steve's father would tell him to put his family together. So she slept with the kid. Big deal. How many people have you slept with? But not a peep out of him. And Steve's mother would have another scotch. The kids used to say, "Oh, Nana always has that glass of cider," and meanwhile she can't stand up. She's wobbling all over the place. My lawyer arranges for me to go to the Tallarico house because this is going to be the showdown. The housekeeper has been teaching Mia to call her husband Papa. They've been claiming that I'm an adulterous child molester whose baby didn't even know I was her mother. So it's in the hands of the guardian. And I walked in the door, and Mia screamed out, "Mommy!" And it was all over. And so naturally the guardian on the spot decided in my favor. I just looked at everybody as if I wanted to kill them. It was so disgusting for me to be in this house and to know that this is what I had married into. They took me to court with statutory rape charges thrown in for good measure. It was kind of a joke because 16 is the legal age in New Hampshire, but they were desperate to get control of Stephen and his money. They lost. The judge was John J. Fairbanks, and he was gay and used to dress in women's clothes. 2 years later, he was on America's Most Wanted for swindling elderly people. He's dead now, but the young boys always used to laugh about getting a traffic violation and having to appear in front of Judge Fairbanks. He'd give them a blowjob or something and let them off. And I certainly had a lesson about adultery with rednecks. My next extramarital flings would be with the country club boys, and not till several years later, around 1984. My attempt to reconcile with Steve had ended with a disastrous trip to Hawaii in 1983, where his drug dealer was waiting for us at the airport. Does that give you some idea of how well that little journey went? Anyhow, I was back in New Hampshire, 30 and miserable, and there were these adorable boys with pot and coke and big boats and big cars. These boys were happening. And Freddie had long blonde hair and beautiful green eyes, like a semi-grown-up Luke Halpin, my first teen idol, or a young, pretty Robert Redford, or the Dutch boy. He carried a flask of scotch, and this was all very Gatsby-esque. At least I was having fun. My houseboy was more muscular, 'cause he had worked physically. This one just had to cash checks, so he was more slim and more fun. There was a gang of them, but I picked this one because he was the prettiest and most adventurous. He was into the Grateful Dead and Hendrix. He liked to wear bandanas on his head with his long blonde hair and pale green eyes. Finally, here's someone who's fun and cool and rich. He's not some primitive caveman like my out-to-lunch husband. I gave him his first blowjob, and I told him he could come on my face. He was so thrilled. This was truly an adventure for him. I guess we fell asleep right afterwards, because when I woke up I couldn't open my eyes. His preppy little load of cum had solidified and sealed them tightly shut. This was a healthy kid, ripe for molding. We had a blast, but I did make him a little crazy, I think. I got demanding, and he wanted to hang out with his friends, and I would get bored. I was like a spoiled girl, and here was my play toy, and I wanted him all to myself. And then I said I wouldn't see him anymore, and he threatened to kill himself. He put a gun to his head and said, "The only way you'll get rid of me is if I die." What a drama queen I'd gotten myself involved with. I said, "Then please go do it somewhere else. This is ridiculous. You're acting like a child." And he'd sit there and cry, then leave, and then come back and scream, "Let me in, let me in, let me in." I had to lock all the doors and windows and go, "Please go find your friends. That's what you should be doing. We can't be together. I'm a mom with a kid, and you're a young guy. Go back to school, go to Paris, and get a girl your own age." Cradle robber? I was not. These were not children. These were young men, actually, perhaps emotionally a bit too young and in need of too much attention, which is kind of childlike. I really wanted someone I didn't have to take care of. I wanted a man, really, but I wasn't prepared. A young guy just wants to have fun, and then they fall in love, don't you know? After all, I'm already a mother. And that was the end of my life as an adulteress. End of side 3. The damage done. Stephen is a great lyricist, but the drugs made even the songwriting process very painful for him. The studio would be paid for by the hour, and the band would be waiting, plus every crew member. This became extremely expensive, and he'd show up 2 days late. He was always the last one there. He'd be off doing drugs while the other guys were trying to write the music, but they needed to have the words. So it was a cycle going nowhere. He'd get there and lock himself in a room and do massive amounts of drugs in order to get some lyrics out. He would end up going into the studio and writing on the hallway walls. I think Dream On and some other famous Aerosmith hits were composed on the walls. He'd get really stoned and so desperate for the words to come. It was kind of sad. In the early 80s, there were horror stories all over the place. Stephen lying on the street outside a drug hotel in the West 50s. Stephen crapping in his pants and not knowing it. He was so drugged out and hanging with a girl that he'd met at his drug dealer's, who now he happens to be married to. He told me that she was a prostitute who had to go out and turn tricks, and he would buy her the economy-sized box of prophylactics so she could make the money to buy his drugs. He was pissed off that I needed groceries and diapers. He hated me, and he beat me up all the time. My parents didn't beat me half as much as he did. More than once, I thought he was going to kill me. I couldn't just leave. I was stuck in something, and where was I to go? What was I going to do? When women are battered, they always get asked, "Why didn't you just leave?" And you don't answer. You just can't. So I had to lie about the bruises. Tom Hamilton would get angry. Joe was freaked. And Johnny Thunder saw these huge rug burns on me and said, "What the fuck is that?" Nobody else said anything. So I would lie, even though Tom and Joe knew what was happening. You're embarrassed to tell the whole story, and you're afraid they'll hurt you more. If you tell, you'll get it worse. It's like being brainwashed. You're just too weak to make a move. Stephen was such a drug asshole, so dangerous to himself, not to mention to others, that he went out of his way to get himself arrested in Canada. It's true. This was after Keith Richards got arrested, and that must have really got him going. Stephen was going through the airport in Toronto, and he just took out a handful of hash and just threw it on the floor. One of the roadies ran over and tried to pick it up, but he was too late. Stephen had been seen. and he got busted. He threw it right on the floor in front of the guy, and he knew the authorities were watching them, carefully, what with the reputation they already had. So now he was a real rock star. When you think of it, when you're doing drugs, being dead or alive is accidental. Sometimes it's nothing more than luck. One girl does a hit, she gets a hot shot, she's gone. The next one, she copped down the street from a different guy, and she lived. If you've ever had too many drugs in your body, if you've ever taken too much, you're saying to yourself, this could be it. And sometimes it is. It overwhelms you. And you just go, see ya. There's nothing else. I don't know why I survived when I should have died. I certainly came close to death at least once. I overdosed with Stephen and had to be resuscitated. I saw the white light and all this kind of stuff after shooting up a massive cocaine hit in New Hampshire. It was really spooky. He was scared to death. I had a grand mal seizure, something he'd never seen, though I certainly had seen him go through many of them. Ugh, shooting up. It is such a dirty, ugly thing. I will say that to women. I can't speak to guys from that point of view. No one should abuse anything. Don't try it. Don't do it. You're not missing anything. I'm not doing it anymore, and I don't miss it, and I don't crave it. Shooting up is so disgusting. It is the bottom of the pit. It's like you have nothing left in you, and you still want to see how far down you can take yourself. There is nothing worse than needles. You've gone into the devil's workshop. You're gone. You're over. Both feet are over there. Every good thing that Stephen and I could have had together was tainted by the drugs. Threefold tainted, bad. There is no good time when there are drugs. You don't feel good. They make you stupid and irrational. They put you in another world. So how can you say you're having a good time? Leaving this space, this body, this dimension for some fucked up delusion? This dimension is very cool, and you can do a lot with it. Once you take drugs, you're nowhere. You're not here. You're not there. That's how I was on them, especially cocaine. And I hate cocaine more than anything in this world. You say, I love you, or this is cool. And it's not you talking or feeling that. It's a drug. Cocaine really made Stephen psychotic, too. A really good time is sitting with a person straight and saying, I love being with you. I must really love being here because I'm here. On drugs, you're talking because drugs are making you, or opening doors that really aren't there to be opened. It's not real. And always, there's anger. Anybody who had done drugs that's off them now can tell you, it wasn't that good. They were sick more than they were high, and unhappy more than they were feeling good by far. If you can die from something, or go crazy, how can it be good? And I have a warped sense of reality when it comes to people. I don't trust people anymore. I haven't been with a man for years because of one horrible, disgusting, drugged-out trip that could have been something beautiful. A beautiful child, a house, a husband, a wife. It should have been something beautiful that grows spiritually. This was being murdered every single day. It was being ripped away, and there's nothing I can say that's good about it. And it's the only thing in my life I'm sorry I did. I really regret the use of drugs. The only thing I really hate in this world. There's a lot of things I don't care for, but the only thing in this world I hate now is abuse. And drugs are abuse. And everything around them is abused. It's just an ugly, dirty world. It's truly taking that walk on the dark side. So much innocence that I had has been taken away from me. Good positive innocence, not just naivete. Part of my womanness has been taken away. I told that to Stephen one time, and he said, what is it you want? And I just said, I want to be a woman. And he looked at me like he really understood. Although Stephen Tyler and I were legally married for 9 years, I don't want you to think I lived in this drug hell for that long. I'd be dead now for sure if the actual part of living with Stephen had lasted any longer than it did. At the time we were married in September of 1978, we were on the road most of the time. In 1979, Aerosmith started to fall apart. First Joe Perry left, and then Brad Whitford. Both were replaced, but there were lots of problems with the new members. Albums weren't selling, and the touring was getting erratic because of Stephen's drug use. In 1981, Stephen and I sublet a really nice apartment in New York on West End Avenue from the actor Tony LoBianco, so Stephen could work on an album and be closer to the big drug dealers. I took a trip to St. Bart's, St. Martin's, and Florida with the baby to get away from everything and to get off heroin. And when I was gone, Stephen and some girlfriend and a drug dealer who was living with them trashed the apartment and they were thrown out. He broke all the mirrors, smashed everything breakable. I guess it was a cocaine fit, because that's what coke did to him. Stephen had wanted me to come back to New York then, but instead I insisted that he come to Florida so that I could see what condition he was in before I returned into his life. When he came down there, he was cooking up coke constantly and freebasing away like mad, and it was a horrible, horrible time, and I never wanted to be with him again. He was just too far gone. I wanted to be in New York, apart from him, and just with my daughter. I'd slipped so far down, I didn't want any of my friends in New York to see me. I wanted to work this out for myself, get rid of the drugs, and give my daughter some of the attention she needed. That was really the end of me and Stephen living together as man and wife. We would see each other and even had sex a few times in the next few years. Plus there was the horrendous trip to Hawaii. But in effect, we were separated. So Stephen moved into the Mayflower Hotel on Central Park West, and I went to live in the apartment of Jack Douglas in the West 70s between Park and Columbus Avenue. This was 1982, and it was the apartment Jack had been living in when he was producing John Lennon's last album, and in December, the reporters would come around looking for Jack to talk about John's death in 1980, and I was doing drugs again. I couldn't maintain this apartment. I couldn't get it together, and Stephen wasn't giving me any money. He'd come and visit and have the nerve to complain that there were no plants, that I wasn't making it presentable enough. Mind you, he wasn't even living there. I asked for money to buy plants when I was really trying to get money to buy diapers and things for Mia. This was a little kid, and there was no money, and he's not there for us, and he didn't want to talk about anything that didn't have to do with him doing drugs. He would come over unannounced, any time he wanted to. I can figure out it was 1982 because I remember watching Charles and Di get married in the West End Avenue apartment, and that would have been about a year before. Actually, days, weeks, months meant nothing to me. Each day was survival. At this point, I started saying to myself, "You've got to go." And I started becoming strong enough physically, consciously, and emotionally to say, "Go! This has got to end." I was clearing out and cleaning up. I called a girlfriend, packed a bag, rented a car, and drove to New Hampshire. I went to see David Krebs to say goodbye. We did 2 lines of coke each, and I was behind the wheel within 2 hours, and that was it. That was my own personal bottom. I would stay in New Hampshire for 7 years, and it was a hard time, but I know I saved my life by getting my battered little ass out of New York that day in 1982. We got back to New Hampshire in time for Mia's 4th birthday. Cleaning up the act. I started getting straight, or making the effort and suffering through a bunch of setbacks in 1982. Getting straight doesn't mean getting perfect. It means getting rid of drug addictions. There are still lots more problems to face, but without the drugs. At least you're ready to battle the rest of your problems with a relatively clear mind. It was when we were living on West End Avenue that I decided to get off heroin. It was too horrible, so I went to a public methadone clinic, and they got me started. And then a private doctor gave me a large amount, enough to fill a giant scope bottle, and I took Mia and went to St. Martin's and then Florida, and took little nips from the bottle whenever I started to get achy. I was on the highest dose of methadone they give, 97 milligrams. I just took enough to get rid of the pain in the back of my neck, which is where I would always start to feel that need for dope. So I'd take that nip, just to make it go away. I was determined not to substitute a methadone addiction for a heroin addiction. So I weaned myself down from that stuff as well. I finished the mouthwash bottle after about 2 weeks, and I was starting to come back from the dead. I went walking with Mia, I climbed coconut trees, and I was feeling better. I don't recommend this method to everyone. I had put myself in charge of my own therapy, and that can be very dangerous. When I left New York for New Hampshire in 1982, I left the heroin habit behind. True, I had been dabbling when I lived in Jack Douglas's apartment, but my Jones had been alleviated by the methadone. By the time I fled New York for New Hampshire, I was heroin-free. I started drinking more, but there was no heroin, no pills. Then you start getting some memory back, and then a little bit of help from the natural food stores. B12 and B-complex, I think, are great for a person who's been on drugs. B-complex restored my mind in some way and took away the depression, and I started coming back a little. So I spent 1982 through 91 in New Hampshire, the last half of that time as a divorced single parent. It was a nightmare. My body was physically wiped out. I didn't want to do any drugs, and the only people that came around were people who wanted to get high. This was not the sun shining on my little girl as I had planned, so I kind of had a nervous breakdown. Not a mental breakdown where you're having delusions. This is your body collapses, and you have no strength, mentally, emotionally, physically. My nervous system was shot from drugs, stress, giving up drugs. There were times when I thought my skin would catch on fire. That's how lousy I felt. My divorce came final on November 13, 1987. I got screwed. It's really complicated, which spares you the boring part. But mainly my lawyers don't want me to say much about it because it's being contested. Suffice it to say, I lost everything. The judge thought I was a greedy old witch. They ripped me apart. My original alimony agreement was giving me $450 a month and $300 in child support. We had a 1,000-gallon oil tank, and all that money was going towards heating the house. I had someone living in the house for $350 a month, but my oil bill was $1,000. You figure out what's left to live on. My days during those years were torture because I had this weariness that wouldn't go away. I would get up and give Mia her bath immediately, then make her cinnamon toast, stay up with her until around 10 a.m., and try to get her to take a nap at that point. Then I'd have to lie down and rest. This was when she was 3 and 4. By the time she got to preschool, I was resting nearly all the time. Then the eating started. I became a compulsive eater, and I could think of nothing but eating, all day and all night. I'd start cooking, and I'd make these huge meals from food I'd charge at the grocery store, from appetizer to dessert, because I missed New York restaurants where you could get any kind of meal anytime you wanted it. But there was no place to eat up there, and there was no one to help me cook. I didn't know how to do anything, but I got a book called Gourmet Cooking Course, and I started on page 1, all about this is your kitchen, and this is what you'll need, etc. Poor Mia, she wanted hot dogs, and I'm making prune soufflés. I went wild for breads, cheese bread, poppy bread, you name the bread, I made it. Bread, bread, bread. Then I started in on meats. Now I never ate meat. I hated meat, and suddenly I'm doing racks of lambs and loving them. I gained 65 pounds in about 3 months. I wasn't a thrower-upper either. I'd eat and just sit so quietly and rest until I knew I wouldn't throw up. I was thinking, this is owning. I felt warm and safe, so I would sit and wait until it settled down. And I wasn't going to throw up because it was mine, all mine, and then I'd think about eating again. I'd be up in the middle of the night cooking eggs and bacon and making sandwiches. This was a sickening way to live. I didn't want drugs, and food was legal. Food was easy to get, and who was going to say anything? I wasn't being bad. Eating is a good thing to do. Eating is all right. So I got so fat I couldn't even cross my legs, and I had to wear my old maternity clothes. What a great adventure I'd had. A skeleton walking the streets of New York, afraid to be seen by my old friends, and an obese shut-in living in a New Hampshire hovel. And before that, the toast of downtown New York, and Warhol's glamorous prop and confidant, the queen of the rock and roll road. Things were going backwards, inside out. I was clean of drugs, but I was a gross, housebound whiskey mama. No, stop. Help. I have a child. I owe her more than this. I owe myself more. I owe God more. God saved me. He got me and my daughter back to New York as a brand new Cyrinda, mother, socialite, and fabulous persona rédue. Out of there, back here. I was so badly advised on my divorce settlement. I was told that the band was broke and that there might never be any more money than there was now, that I was best off taking whatever I could get. I reopened the proceedings in 1988. It shows how much out of touch I was that the song Angel got to number 3 in April of that year. and the group was really on a roll. It was at this point that their comeback was acknowledged to be as remarkable as any ever seen in the rock era. And all I have is a house I can't sell, because there's no money for repairs. I called David Krebs for help or advice, but he said there was nothing he could do. The 1988 legal stuff amounted to me getting nowhere. I might as well have been slamming my head against the wall. His business managers and lawyers were very good, the best that money could buy, and they strung me out. I was stuck in New Hampshire, and it was fucking bleak. I traded parts of Stephen's boat for a cord of wood because we were freezing, and he'd come up and want to know what the hell happened to his boat. I burned it so your daughter wouldn't freeze to death, you bastard. Finally, after going through the divorce and the futile replay of it, and all the shit I've been through with my health and the food and the drugs, and now the drinking, my mind started to clear itself. And I wanted out of there. I wanted to be back in New York. I was actually sitting there writing notes saying, I'm so sad. Fuck New Hampshire. Cold, dreary, moronic. Nowhere New Hampshire. Why would I want to stay there a minute longer? This was Stephen's area, where he spent his summers, where his parents had their resort, and why was I there? I was in my 30s, and my energy was returning, and most important, Mia was growing up, and I didn't want her partaking of the non-civilization that surrounded us up there. Why shouldn't she have the benefits of New York City culture and a good school? I'd noticed that with all the girls up there, by the time you were in the 8th grade, you were either a scholar and getting out of there, or pregnant and drunk. As it had been in Oklahoma 20 years ago, New York was on my mind. Cheryl Krebs, David's estranged wife, came up to visit me, and she saw how dreadful my condition was, although she was tactful enough not to come right out and just say that, as if I had needed to be told. When she left, she invited me to come and visit her in New York. I put Mia with her aunt and cousin. I got a really cheap plane ticket, and I went to New York. 45 minutes by plane, but in my mind, it was another planet. There have been so many different Cyrindas since the one that first got off the plane from Oklahoma in 1971. No matter who you are, I bet you think there was something glamorous about each one of them. The bride of 2 lead singers, the cocaine skeleton, the toast of Max's Kansas City, the fags, fave, rave. But there was nothing glamorous about this fat housefrau standing in Cheryl's kitchen, looking at the buildings out the window and sobbing. I was back in New York. I'd been gone for 8 years. I wanted to be here again, and I didn't want to be back in New Hampshire. That's for certain. While I was in New York, this giddiness overtook me. Some guiding spirit got a hold of the part of me that takes care of myself and mine, and I suddenly called the Archdiocese of New York and asked about parochial schools for children. I called 2 of them that sounded good and made appointments to visit them. Based upon a positive response from Marymount, I flew to Manchester, New Hampshire from Newark, and I got home and said to Mia, "You're going to New York. You're going to be interviewed." And she was like, "What for? I don't want to go there." She didn't know New York, and she hadn't been there since she was 3, and now she was 11. I said, "You're going to take some tests for school in New York." I was crying, and she said, "Why do you always cry when you talk about New York?" And I said, "Honey, you don't understand. My heart beats when I'm in New York. My blood flows when I'm there." I was delirious with excitement when the 2 of us got to town. We had to take a bus from the airport to the Port Authority terminal, and I was warning Mia to hang on to my jacket. Don't let go. I have to hold the bags. You have to hold me. There's runaways and drug addicts and scary people. She was hanging on for fear of life, and I loved it. I was here. I thought I was going to burst. Mia passed the tests, and Marymount wanted a $1,500 deposit. I asked Stephen's people for it, and they sent it without asking any questions. I don't know why. Because when Stephen heard that his people had paid the school deposit, he freaked, and he wouldn't let us have the money it would take to move to New York. They wouldn't fix the house, but they didn't want me moving to New York. Stephen's going, "It's just a geographical difference. You are who you are." I recognize this as AA bullshit brainwashing. You need to change who you are. Well, that's wonderful wisdom, but I'm not from New Hampshire. You are. I'm from New York. I have custody of our child, and I want to bring her up in New York. Why did you pay for the school if you're not going to pay for us to live where the school is? I'm collapsing now all over the place, breaking out in hives, chain-smoking cigarettes. I can't believe this. I got a lawyer and started an action against Stephen. Among other things, the judge wanted to know where the child was going to live. He said that since the child was going to be in school in a safe neighborhood, she must live in a safe neighborhood. Steve's lawyer said that Queens had lots of perfectly safe neighborhoods, and she could take the subway in. The judge said something like, "No way. I don't care if you have to pay to have her live at the Plaza Hotel. The child will live in a safe, nice neighborhood not far from the school." Now, I was back in New York, in a tiny apartment on Madison Avenue where we were supposed to live for 3 months, and stayed 5 years. It was so small, we kept bumping into each other. Mia couldn't have friends over and have any privacy, and neither could I. We painted it red, painted her room purple, anything to pretend it wasn't a shoebox. Once I squeezed 20 people in there, and no one could move. Finally, I couldn't live like that anymore. In early 1996, we moved into a real apartment on East 68th Street, where Mia even has her own bathroom. It's just divine. And I love it. My first year back in New York, I devoted to settling Mia into her new home, her new school, and a new life. I saw none of my old friends, and until I lost a lot of weight, I wasn't eager to. Andy Warhol had died on my birthday in 1987, and that blew my mind, because how can you find anybody without Andy around? But little by little, I started running into people. I reacquainted myself with Liz Derringer, and one day while we were at lunch at Mortimer's, I saw Sam Green. I sent a note over to him. He jumped up and ran over and said, "Oh my God, Cyrinda, you're back, and there's so much more of you." I thought, oh good, I'm home. Someone is telling me the truth. Yeah, I'm here. I'm fat. I'm in New York. Deal with it, girl, because food was still my drug of choice. The people you love, the people you have loved, are so precious. Friends who are in their 30s, 40s, and 50s say that they lose people as fast as, or faster than their parents do. You had to be tough to have been a butterfly in New York, or in rock and roll in the 60s and 70s, and still be here. I always look at Iggy Pop. He's a saint of survivors. I love him like a brother. He may be the smartest of us all, and he is probably the toughest. As long as Iggy's on the team, we're okay. Is Steven Tyler on the team? As a husband, human being, father? That's a good question. What could he do to surprise and delight me at this point? Turn into a decent human being. Make Mia and me not embarrassed that he's related to us. Not make where we have to fake it and do that Hollywood thing. Make it where we could genuinely say, "God, my dad's great. He calls me all the time to see how I am." I hate to say it's only a money or material thing, but sometimes those things mean that someone is thinking about you. And with Steve, that's pretty much the way he shows it. I mean, she gets plenty of advice from me, and she hates it. She needs her daddy to behave like one. My daughter's sister, the movie star. My daughter's half-sister, Liv Tyler, is very much in the spotlight these days. Liv's father, of course, is Stephen. He and Liv's mother, Bebe Buell Shivers, who is also the off-and-on manager of Liv's career, had a fling of sorts in 1976, during which time Liv was conceived. Bebe was a very pretty girl and a Ford model, until they dumped her for doing a Playboy spread. I'd heard that after her moment with Stephen, she came back looking like she'd been to war. It took a while for her to get back to being the beautiful Bebe after spending time with Steven Tyler. I can attest that he can do that to a girl. Stephen told me that he did it with Bebe because Mick Jagger did. It's what I was talking about earlier on. Did he really want to sleep with Mick? I always wondered. Stephen has said to me that he would have paid for Bebe to have an abortion if she had wanted one back then, but I have to assume that she wanted the baby. Whatever, I think she's done a brilliant job with her daughter's career. Bebe has turned out to be a shrewd businesswoman, and I admire her for that. Bebe and I have never fought over Stephen's love, whatever that might be, nor have we ever been close friends. I have nothing serious against her, and my fags are always telling me that Bebe and I should start having lunches and being girlfriends and all. I'm not sure that's what I want to do. Bebe's okay, though, but we just don't know each other very well. Our daughters are sisters, and very fond of each other, and it's important that Bebe and I not be enemies. There is at this point absolutely no reason why we should be. There is a bond between us whether I like it or not. She has her own agenda and her own outlook on life, and they are so different from mine. Not better or worse, just different. When I moved back to New York in 1991, I ran into Bebe and Liz Derringer, and they said, "Oh, you have to come over and meet Liv. You just must. It was like, we're both mothers of young daughters. I'll show you mine. You show me yours. In the meantime, Mia and Liv had met a few more times at concerts, but nothing more was said about them being sisters. Certainly not by Stephen. I did as they asked. I went over to Beebe's apartment in the East 20s. I just looked at this girl, and tears welled up in my eyes. I mean, this was my daughter's sister. Liv wasn't tall and thin then. She was still short, and the two girls were like two little buttery balls, two healthy New England-type kids. I never said, "This is Stephen's daughter." I said, "This is Mia's sister." I wasn't crying for myself, or certainly not for Stephen, but for Mia. All of a sudden, Mia has a sister. I was thrilled, and I could tell that Beebe seemed very satisfied with my display of emotion. I could see the calculating going on. After all, at this point, Stephen with Aerosmith's big Geffen Records comeback was much, much richer than Todd Rundgren, who had very kindly agreed to bring up Liv as his own daughter, knowing that she wasn't. But I knew Stephen, and I told Beebe, "You better see a lawyer, because he's not going to do anything for you and your child." Beebe didn't want to follow that route. She couldn't understand why anyone wouldn't want to love her daughter as much as she did. And believe me, this is not Stephen's way, and I tried to convince her of that. "I want to do it peacefully," she would say. "I'd like him to come forward." I said, "He's never going to come forward and give you anything." "Well, my relationship with him is more friendly," Beebe said. And I told her, "It just goes to show how much you don't know this guy." And for all the dangling of Liv Beebe would do in front of Stephen, he was not about to come forward. So she decided maybe she did need a lawyer. Also, she was tired of working 2 jobs. I've got to hand it to Beebe. She was chumming for White Shark, and she'd thrown out a lot of big chunks, and she got him. Of course the blood test came back and proved the paternity, and she changed Liv's name and started presenting her as the star of the future. Stephen was up to his ears in conflict over this. He felt he had to explain it to Mia, and still he wanted to evade the whole issue. He didn't become Liv's adoring father until she started getting into the spotlight on her own merits. Now he's such a father. I just saw him on TV where he's at this party in South Beach for some magazine that Liv is on the cover of, and he's going, "Oh, this is a hip magazine. It's alive. It's fresh." He's doing the Hollywood thing, and he's so bad at it. He's so phony. He had nothing to do with this girl until he was forced into taking a blood test. Mia had been thrilled by the whole thing. This was the greatest thing that had ever happened to her. She finally had a sister. It got off to a bit of a rough start. Oddly, it got better between the two girls when Liv's career started to take off. And I think she started to see that not only her mother but her father were horning in on her game. Also, it's become apparent to her how limited her father is emotionally. I remember once in my apartment, Liv was there. Stephen came over. It was just after the paternity question was settled. She was literally jumping on him like a big Irish setter. And he was looking at me like, "Help!" I just sat there and looked, even though I felt bad for the girls. He's trying to untangle Liv from around his neck. Mia is jealous. And no one is happy. The sisters are really close now. They're on the phone all the time. Mia is really proud of Liv, and she's thrilled about all the stardom. The father-daughter stuff is pukey, though, and they all know it. There was a gossip item in the New York Post about Liv firing Beebe, and some identified insider said that it's Stephen, not Beebe, who's cashing in on this kid. Then another insider says that for the first 10 years of her life, Stephen didn't want anything to do with Liv. That proves it's not me as the insider, because it was 14 years. As if I would get into the columns on this subject. And the insider goes on to say that now he's prancing around with Liv at her premieres, and that he's the one Liv ought to fire. I swear it wasn't me that said that. The feeling must be universal. Beebe called Lee Childers and accused him of being the insider, and then told him she was sure I was one of the people who talked. I can't stoop to defend myself from such nonsense. Epilogue. Resurfacing. There is no such thing as a total divorce when there have been children. Those marriages do last forever, in some form or another, no matter what legal, physical, financial, or emotional twist you apply to them. With me and Stephen, we seem to have gone through some spiral passage, where we're back at the beginning. Not really. Good grief. But an entirely different level. After all the abuse, I'm a princess again when we're together. He's respectful and almost playful, even when we're going at each other full tilt, via lawyers, faxes, on the phone, or in person. We were lovers and partners. Now we're opponents. and that's part of the fate of this very odd couple. The end of the struggle is nowhere in sight. When we first met, we challenged each other. It was an unspoken challenge, but a powerful one. I thought I was his saving grace, a touch of class he badly needed. He was my Prince Valiant. He was, and is, extremely talented. Certainly better at his work than I was at mine. But I had this panache, so together I thought we'd be perfect. What happens when you make important life decisions based on really superficial criteria? You fuck up, that's what. And that's what we did. I was overwhelmed by his sexiness, his musical abilities, and of course the high-flying glamour of it all. But I didn't know him. I didn't know how sick he was mentally or emotionally. I had never been around anyone that damaged, or maybe I never took the time to be around anyone long enough to find out. By the time I found out where I'd put myself, I was an abused wife, a mother, and a full-blown drug addict. I could have gone under, but I came back. That was some dive I took. You get asked if you'd have done it differently. Not married someone else. How can I answer that? Then I wouldn't have my child, who I love more than anything else in this world. I'd like to have made those years more comfortable, but that's all I'd change. Somehow I picked the wrong guy and got the right child. Right now, I like being free. I think being liberated in this lifetime is a wonderful goal. I think marriage and poverty are clearly not liberating, nor is fame. Knowledge is the most liberating thing you can have in any form, from a book, a museum, a concert, or the street. Chasing after knowledge, I made lots of mistakes that were painful and very hard to live through, some of which I still suffer because of. I feel that's my path. I wish I had gotten a real first-class education, and I might have focused more on a career. I still have a fantasy about being a fabulous magazine editor. I guess that right now I'm so typical of the New York woman I always wanted to be, although when you're 17, you don't know that 40 is going to be a little more complicated. I'm divorced and living on the Upper East Side. I still would like to lose some weight and have more money. I'm constantly school shopping for my daughter. I have a fax and a cell phone, both of which I use a lot, and I'm struggling with the joys of operating a computer. I have a great acupuncturist and fully intend to visit the New York Zen Center, which is right around the corner. But it's so hard finding the time. I'm glad Central Park is nearby. Sometimes just seeing a tree makes things better. Someday I'd like to have a little place in the country to visit on weekends, but not in New Hampshire. Recently, Jerry Lee Lewis played at Tramps, and I went with my lawyer, Jay Butterman, and my dear friend, Catherine McCormick. It was so great. This is truly rock and roll, the real rock and roll that was my brother's record collection, the music that was the most glorious thing in my whole childhood. I got a little teary-eyed during the show. He's in his 60s, and he's still the killer. And there was something about seeing him that told me my childhood was over. Jerry Lee was my roller coaster ride when I was 5 years old, and it made me so happy and sad at the same time to see him now. After the show, I was talking about it with Catherine. I was thinking, boy, for living the way he lived, all the drugs, the hotels, the wives, the scandals, the violence, and the cigarettes, the dramas, the traumas, all that, he's still sexy. Ooh, what would it be like hanging out with Jerry Lee? I'd like to thank all the musical greats for giving me direction through their art, and to Auntie Mame for proclaiming, life is a banquet, and most poor suckers are starving to death. My sentiments exactly.
Copyright 1996, Dove Audio Incorporated. If you would like to receive a Dove Audio or Dove Kids catalog, please call 1-800-328-3683 or 1-800-328-DOVE.